But we're thrilled that you came out this morning. Happy to see you. A lot of you, like me, have very tired faces because the good citizens in this room were up until 2 a.m. when the Senate trial ended with a little mini lecture from Chief Justice Roberts to the lawyers on both sides, calling them down for being so insulting and outrageous and all the rest of it. But I really was amused by his line, which was, "Don't you know where you are? This is the United States Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body." And I thought, are we really that bad off in the world? I mean, it was the greatest deliberative body about 2 generations ago, maybe, or 3 or 4, but it hadn't been that in a while. Anyway, it was quite a day, and I think we have a lot more of them in store. But we're not talking about, yes, we are talking about impeachment. I'm sure some of the panelists will and some of the speakers will. How could they avoid it? And I appreciate those of you who attended Mia Love's breakfast. Congresswoman Love's breakfast here this morning. And we have Congresswoman Barbara Comstock with us as well, and former lieutenant, they're former congresswomen, and Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, former lieutenant governor of Maryland, is either with, I don't think she's here yet, but she will be later this morning. So, and we have a lot of great panelists. I'm really thrilled about it. I don't know if you've seen the list, but you may have noticed something. It's historic. This is not the world's greatest deliberative body, but we can still make a little history now and then. I am the first and last male speaker you will see today. Now, I'm going to assume you were applauding me, not the fact that I'm the last male speaker you will be seeing. Nonetheless, as you know, this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Absolutely. It took us a while, didn't it? Although Wyoming was way ahead of everybody else, and they stopped right there. But they were the ones who gave women the right to vote first, but in state elections. Anyway, it took a long time, but good things sometimes take a while, and we're going to continue to make progress like that. But in any event, we're going to have a series of programs this year honoring the 100th anniversary, the centennial of the women's vote. And kind of interesting that ERA passed in Virginia. It's probably symbolic. Somehow I can't, there you go. It'll be tough to get that one past the Supreme Court. That's my guess. But we'll see. Sometimes we have big surprises in store, but I'll be shocked if they actually let it go by. But all of our panels, all of our keynote speakers, all of the young people, the students here are going to be introducing the panelists and keynoters are women. And so this is the first of what I'm sure will be other programs that celebrate the women's suffrage centennial in one manner or another, but we're delighted to be able to kick it off in the year 2020. Let's see, I'm supposed to announce, let's see, there's another commercial after you already saw 3 minutes, but some of you may not have been awake. This one, let's see, we provide all this programming free of charge. Yeah, it's commercial, all right. Please text UVA CFP, that's Center for Politics, UVA CFP to 41444 to give today. Again, that's UVA CFP to 41444. See, I'm trying not to screw it up the way Biden did at one of those debates. You remember when he couldn't get the texting thing right? But he's 10 years older than I am. That's probably part of it right there. That's ageist, but anybody over 65 is allowed to say things like that. That's, I think, in the code, right? Is that in the code, Barbara? And I think it is. Yeah, somewhere. She's not sure. That's a perfect politician's answer. You're not sure and you'll check on it. Okay. Look, they're going to give me the hook in just a second, and I'm just going to turn this over to one of our current interns, Morgan Negrone. And Morgan is going to start us off. And Morgan, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. It's wonderful. It's not easy to come up here and follow the first and only male speaker, but she's going to do it and do a great job of it. Come on up, Morgan.
Hi, I'm Morgan Agrone. I'm a third-year government major at the university and a current intern at the Center for Politics. And with this lovely position, I've been given the opportunity to introduce the first panelist today. Mia B. Love is a former representative for the 4th Congressional District of Utah. She was elected to office in 2014 and is the first and only Republican black female to ever serve in the United States Congress. Ms. Love was appointed as the only freshman to serve on the select panel for infant lives to investigate the selling of organs on the free market. She was also selected to serve on the Financial Services Committee, which handles regulation of our nation's financial institutions. Prior to her work in Congress, Ms. Love served as a city councilwoman and mayor in her hometown of Saratoga Springs, Utah. Mia is currently a CNN correspondent and was recently appointed as a non-resident senior fellow at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. Most importantly, Mia is the daughter of legal immigrants from Haiti, a wife, a mother of 3 children, and a proud American. Let's give Mia a warm Virginia welcome.
Good morning. Well, I hope everyone's caffeinated, and I'm excited to be here today. I have to tell you, I am honored that I was invited to speak to you today. This is such a great place, especially, I don't know if you guys know, we actually have someone in common. Has anyone heard of Bronco Mendenhall? I'm a little bitter about that, actually. He did really well for BYU, but he's doing even better for Virginia. So anyway, you're welcome. This is a particularly really interesting time that we live in. I'm excited and just honored and just so happy that we are actually celebrating the 100th year of women's suffrage. And I just think about the people that came before us who worked really hard, who paved the way. And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those women. And I certainly wouldn't have been the first black female Republican ever elected in Congress. And I certainly hope I'm not going to be the last. We've got a lot of work to do. And we still have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to pave the way ourselves. I got you. Good. It's okay. So I was asked a couple of things, and I want to make sure that I answer them. Many have asked me about the 2020 elections and what the state of our country will be and what it will look like. And I believe it will be a bitter battle, but I do think it will depend more on us than it will be on the candidates. I think that our ability to be able to engage in elevated dialogue, our reaction to what happens out there is going to tell a lot about our history and what we are going to look like after this. And I think that there are 3 things I want to talk about that I'm hoping that we'll remember as we go through this process. And I know that there are a lot of affiliations out there, so I want to just say that if we can just look at this as us being responsible stewards of this great place that we live in the United States of America, then that will be a great start, not just for us, but an example to our representatives in Congress and to the White House. So let's start by saying that we here are going to be great stewards and we are going to engage in elevated dialogue because it's more important for us to make sure that we are doing everything we can for the people that come behind us. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I think this one's really important, is do not fit yourself or put yourself into a mold that society tells you to fit into. It's important for all of us to think for ourselves, because I think that the person who controls their own mind and their thoughts controls their future and writes their own history. That's the first thing. The second is take responsibility for our actions and how we treat one another. And the third is take every opportunity to get involved and affect positive outcome. We just celebrated the birthday of Martin Luther King. And one of the quotes that I posted on social media that I think is so incredibly relevant today is he said, "We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools." A few years ago, I had an opportunity like this to speak at the University of Chicago. And a lot of people told me, don't go. That's not friendly territory for you. They're not gonna like you. You know, I was speaking to some attorneys and they were young Black aspiring attorneys. And I said, look, if I cannot go and speak to a good, diverse group that thinks differently than me, then I have no right speaking at all. So I went, I told them about my life. I told them about my parents growing up in Haiti. I told them the principles that I grew up with. I told them that my dad said that the greatest moment of his life was when he was able to pledge his allegiance to the American flag. He knew exactly what he was saying and he meant every word of it. And that he wasn't just willing to take on the benefits, but also the responsibilities. I don't know if anybody's been to a naturalization ceremony, but I suggest that everybody goes to one. And I think it's important for us to at least reaffirm to ourselves some of the things that they say and the allegiance that they have to this country that we live in. I think it's important for every American to actually take that oath. But there was this one young lady that stood up and she's like, okay, so explain this to me. I don't understand how you can be a Black woman, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a Republican, living in Utah in today's America. Explain that to me. And I looked at her, I thought about it for a little bit, and I looked at her and I said, I am all of these things because I refuse to fit this mold that society tells me I have to fit into. Imagine if Martin Luther King just took the fact that government treated him like a second-class citizen. We wouldn't be here today. So I said, don't take my opinions as your own. I don't want that. That's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is to think for yourself and preserve your thoughts and your opinions, because no one is going to know more about what you need in your household, what you need in your communities, what you need to serve the people that are around you better than you. So preserve the right to be able to go speak for yourself and have your own mind, and don't let anyone think for you. I have to tell you, I'm so incredibly thankful for people like Martin Luther King and those who came before that refused to fit this mold that society told them that they needed to fit into. I'm grateful for the people that broke glass ceilings and marched even though they knew that they were going to just get pounded, because they stood for something and they had a direction. And the other thing I wanted to say is, if you're not thinking, you're drifting. And when you're drifting, somebody else is doing the thinking for you. History doesn't stop with them, though. It cannot, or we won't have a future. It has to continue with us. And so we have to know that we have a responsibility to leave something and make sure that we, later on, whether you're an unsung hero or somebody that people will talk about later, you have to be able to leave your mark on society. A while ago at a presidential convention, not this last one, but the one before that, I was able to speak, and I remember talking about the America I know, and it's found in every child who looks at a seemingly impossible task and says, I can do that. I don't know if we know how powerful that statement is. My daughter was 3 at the time. She's 20 now. She was 3 at the time, and she was sitting between my husband and I, and we were watching gymnastics. It was the Olympics. And she's jumping up and down on the couch, and all of a sudden we look, and she had jumped off the couch and landed head first on the ground. And my husband and I looked, and we were just like, what just happened? We grabbed her, and we're like, are you okay? And she cried a little bit, and then she was back to jumping on the couch, and she was screaming, I can do that. I'm going to do that. And it's really interesting because I think back on that moment, and I think if she would have said, hey, Mom and Dad, I can do that. I'm going to show you. I'm going to jump off the couch head first. We probably would have said, no, you can't do that. Don't do it. We probably would have said, hey, this is what they're doing is unique and really difficult, and it's going to take a lot of time, but you can't do that right now. And I think about all of the things that we do in order to protect our children. And so many times we protect them so much that we prohibit them from actually flying, right? And most importantly, sometimes we prohibit them from failing. My dad used to tell me all the time, failure is not final. He failed many, many times, and all of those failures made him better. And so I guess what I'm saying is that when we think about that child who tries to do or wants to do something seemingly impossible, if they literally believe that they can get out there and they can fly, our job is to make sure that we build them some really good wings. That flying is what allowed us to land on the moon. That type of confidence that our children have is what they're going to need to deal with the problems that they're going to have. And we've got to do everything we can to allow them to think through some of those. My mom and my dad are first-generation immigrants. My mom used to say, what I love most about America is that we believe in dreams, especially the dreams of an underdog. She used to tell me the story of David and Goliath and how David wasn't supposed to win that fight, and how David was just really smart, and really just made me think about things. David can be, if you relate to what David was, he could be anything. He could be anything to us today, right? David could represent a small town that is just kind of growing. David could be a basketball team that is not supposed to win. David could be that young child or an entrepreneur or somebody who dares to dream. My favorite line in the story of David and Goliath is, for some reason, when it says David ran towards Goliath. Imagine that, running towards a great big bad monster that is going to crush you. He ran towards Goliath. I think that's also the kind of confidence we need if we're going to take on the Goliaths of our problems. Our debt, immigration reform, which is long overdue, healthcare, transportation, access to credit, capital, access to capital, and the Godzilla we call Washington, D.C. It is time for all of us, for we, the people, to run towards the challenges of our day and not run away from it. Too many people are busy trying to be the Goliaths that we've forgotten that our talent is in the Davids. That our country didn't end up this way. It's because when the odds were against us, not Washington, but you, people, rose to the occasion and did what had to be done to preserve an America. So, we have to get involved. We cannot look to Washington to solve all of our problems. The time is to look within. Take personal responsibility for our actions and how we treat one another. A friend of mine said, "It is the essence of seizing every opportunity to teach, to love, and to lead from a position of hope, not judgment. Small and undisciplined minds spend their lives making an argument rather than making a difference. That same friend has this cute daughter. They lived in San Diego, and they would see the San Diego San Padres, which was a baseball team. And they would go, and they could always get really cheap tickets because the stands were always empty. At that time, that team didn't do so well. I don't know how they're doing now, but this little girl, that was the time that she would spend with her dad. And she knew all about baseball and all about stats, and they would sit down, and she spoke to this young man about every single player and how they should perform, and there were always empty seats. So he stood up and grabbed his daughter so that they could sit in a place where they could actually see the game a little bit better. And as soon as they sat down in this new place, somebody hit a fly ball that landed right in the area she just left. And as she looked and had this disappointed look on her face, she just thought to herself, that could have been my ball. And this cute 9-year-old has just been waiting her entire life to try and grab one of these balls. And later on, that young man that had spoken to her went down and got the ball signed, and then he came back up and handed the ball over to her. And when she read it, it said, "To Rachel, go get 'em." And I know exactly what it says because today Rachel has got 3 kids, she's married, and that ball is sitting on her mantle. And it's a great example of what a small thing that somebody did and the impact it has on her life. She says, I put that ball on the mantle, and I tell that story because I want my children to always know what great impact that one small gesture did for me. And she says, anytime I have a chance to do something nice for somebody, I take the opportunity to do it. That one gesture has paid it forward who knows how many times. Those small impacts make a big difference. The civil breakdown and the tear down of each other, I believe, will be our undoing. We are a greater threat to ourselves than other entities out there. Now, it's easy to blame someone else. It's easy to blow someone up on Twitter or tear them down on TV or social media, trying to make an argument. It's okay to disagree. Gosh, I do it all the time on CNN. I mean, it's okay. I couldn't imagine how horrible it would be to have a one-party system instead of a two-party system. I mean, we don't want that. But American democracy is at its best when two people who think differently come together and talk about what they're for. I was the only Republican member in the Congressional Black Caucus, and I absolutely enjoyed my experience there. I believe that leaders try and put themselves in uncomfortable positions and then make themselves comfortable there. And once again, a lot of people said, don't do it, don't join. It's just gonna be really uncomfortable. But I have to tell you, I have friends that are there that will be my friends for life. Cedric Richmond, who was the chairman at the time, well, it was GK and then it was Cedric, but we became such good friends. There was one time where we were sitting and having a candid conversation. My husband was with me at the time too. And he said, okay, so explain to me, why are you a Republican? How does that work? And I said, well, I told him also about my parents and how my parents thought fundamentally, when they came to the United States, less government was better, right? Because it was the government, the dictatorship, that stopped them from thriving. And living under Baby Doc and Papa Doc, it was really impossible for him to be able to have a good, healthy, prosperous life. And my dad has had many experiences that he knew at a very early age that he didn't want to raise his children in Haiti. And so anyway, he said when he came to the United States, I told him that my dad voted for Ronald Reagan, and that was the fundamental thought. And so I said, being a mayor and being a member of the city council and now being here, I believe that the best solutions are found at the most local levels. And I said, well, what about you? Tell me why you're affiliated as a Democrat. And he said, well, for me, it was actually the local governments that kept me from having my individual rights, and that it was the federal government that came in and made sure that the states gave us our civil rights. Now think about that for a moment. Both people are right in their perspectives, and knowing that about each other allowed us to have effective dialogue. There were times where members of the CBC would look at me and say, hey, don't vote with us on this. This is a party thing. You're good. Stay out of that. They would protect me and vice versa. And then there were times where they would go and say, hey, by the way, we're doing tax reform. I need you to go and talk to the conference about this. And there were things that I agreed on. So it was one of those relationships that knowing other people's experiences, knowing where they came from, actually widened my sphere of knowledge. So what I want to say is do not be afraid to express your opinions, but most importantly, do not be afraid to learn from somebody else. It would be better. It'll work out better for you, and it'll work out better for the people that you represent, if you end up representing somebody. It is our responsibility to make sure that we're kind to one another, and we have an obligation to use our gifts and our talents for the betterment of society. Last but not least, get involved and create positive outcomes. We enjoy the blessings of freedom we have in this country, and it wasn't because we did it on our own. Somebody sacrificed their time with their families and even their lives for us to enjoy the blessings of freedom that we have here today. We owe a great deal of gratitude and respect to those who came before us, and we owe a great deal of gratitude and respect for those who served, who wear that United States uniform and go out and put themselves in harm's way so that you and I can have a voice and that we can speak up. And I feel as if it is my obligation to continue to go out there and to do the best that I can, but I do not feel as if I will ever repay the debt that I owe to those who lost their lives to make sure that we have the freedoms that we have today. And freedom, by the way, doesn't mean that you're on your own. I'm not saying that, hey, by the way, you're on your own and you're free to do whatever you want to and you don't look out for anybody else. I think it means that you also take responsibility, not just for your actions, but how you're responsible for other people. In other words, do I believe that we have an obligation to care for those who cannot care for themselves? Yes, I do. Do I believe that if we have the resources and we can help our neighbors? Yes, I do. I also believe that being an American, being a free American, means that you don't have to wait for somebody to force you to do it. That you can get out and you can help people. And you don't have to wait for somebody to tell you, hey, by the way, I'm going to force you to do this. In America, our lives should not be driven just by government dictates, but by individual dreams. I know you have dreams for yourself. I know you have dreams for your children. I know some of you have dreams for your grandchildren. And you didn't find those on a website. They were built with your hand. They were fostered in your heart. American dreams should never, I don't think they should ever be government driven. They should be something that you built in your homes, built in your communities, and you ask and you expect more from your representatives to drive that dream for you. We have to remind them that they don't work for themselves, they work for us. I am so grateful for parents who came to this country with almost nothing for the chance to pursue their version of the American dream. A dream where the underdog is rooted for and is favored to win. A land of unlimited possibilities where our children can dream big, do more, and become their best. An America where we take responsibility for our lives, our successes, and we sacrifice for others. An America where we can disagree and treat each other with respect. And an America that showed us on 9/11, we let the world know that when they messed with one of us, they messed with all of us. For over 200 years, when given the opportunity, we have lended a hand and we've lifted the poor. Given the opportunity, we've pulled ourselves up and united to put down tyranny, terrorism, and evil. Given the opportunity, we help a neighbor and make a difference for a struggling student, a friend, or a parent. Given the opportunity, we overcome overwhelming odds, drive innovative ideas, achieve seemingly impossible. Given the opportunity, Americans rally for a good cause, whether it's down the street or around the world. Why would today be any different? When we know that there are people that want to do us harm, why would today be any different? We have some major challenges, and Washington seems unwilling or incapable to tackle them. So if I had my way, and I would have Congress focus on something, it would be very simple. To regain its Article I powers, focus on legislating and getting back the power of the purse. I would have Congress limit the executive branch to Article II of the Constitution so that they are executing the laws that were passed by Congress. I would have Congress focus on limiting their bills to one subject at a time, which means that every bill enacted by Congress is limited to one subject, and that subject is clearly stated in the title, so that way we don't have members of Congress voting for items that they promise that they would vote for, and voting for items that they swore that they would never vote for because they're attached. How many times were we put in that position where we're voting for something that we swore we would never vote for, but it's attached to something we promised we would? We need to work on our debt. We need to work on immigration reform, trade, foreign policy. Create strength here so that we can experience peace in the world. That's what I would have Congress focus on. And for us, by the way, we have a job to do too. For us, we would regain our ability to affect change and not be subject to the political environment, no matter who is in the White House. Because when we have our rights restored to us, we don't have to fear Congress or the White House. We must have a clear vision and direction for ourselves if we expect our representatives to follow them. There's a paraphrase that Winston Churchill, I'm going to paraphrase this. Winston Churchill said this, and I think about it all the time. He said, to every person, there comes a moment where that person is figuratively tapped on the shoulders and asked to do something specific to their talent. What a shame if that person finds themselves unprepared for what would have been their finest hour. Well, we're there. This is it. We're being tapped on the shoulders right here and right now. How many of us are actually going to run towards Goliath? There are no small parts to be played here, not in this American movement. My challenge to all of you and to myself is not to fit into a mold that society tells us to fit into. Think for ourselves. Be the authors of our own history. Take responsibility for how we treat other people and our own actions. Take every opportunity to get involved, to have a vision, to gain new knowledge and new perspective. Be willing, be prepared for every tap on the shoulder. Volunteer, show up, stand out, speak up for the strong principles that made this country an exceptional place. And I hope that one day, when you and I are looking at the history books and we're reading it with somebody, we can say, We are okay because I did my part to make this country a great, an exceptional, a place where people can look at and realize that the beacon of light was us. I did my part. God bless you all, and God bless this great country we live in, the United States of America. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Isabella Whitfield, and I'm a current intern with the Center for Politics. I'm a fourth year majoring in Foreign Affairs and Studio Art, and today I have the honor of introducing the moderator of our panel, Erica Hill. Veteran morning TV anchor and award-winning journalist Erica Hill serves as CNN lead fill-in anchor and national correspondent. Most recently, she anchored HLN's On the Story with Erica Hill, a daily New York-based daytime news program. Prior to that, Ms. Hill was co-anchor of NBC's weekend edition of Today and also served as an anchor and correspondent for NBC News, contributing to Today, NBC Nightly News, and MSNBC. Ms. Hill was part of the NBC News team that won a 2013 Peabody Award for the network's cross-platform effort, In Plain Sight, Poverty in America. And in 2015, the Alliance for Women in Media honored her with the Gracie Award for Outstanding Correspondent. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Erica Hill.
Good morning, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have two kids, and they have generously passed on a cold to me, so if I'm sniffling a little, you'll know why. We have Weston and Sir to thank, but we're going to keep them because they're cute. Thanks again to everyone for having all of us here today for this important discussion. Larry and the Center for Politics, thank you. It's the 21st Annual American Democracy Conference, and of course, as Larry noted, in August will mark the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. We should also note that today, for the first time in the state's history, Virginia now has the first woman Speaker of the House of Delegates and the first woman to serve as President pro tem of the Senate. And a lot has certainly changed in 100 years, and there is still a lot to do. It's my pleasure now to introduce this morning's panel. First off, Leslie Sanchez, who's a Latina American author, a CBS News political analyst, the founder and CEO of Impacto Insights, a Washington, D.C. based market research and consulting firm, and she was ranked one of Newsmax's 50 most influential Latino Republicans. Leslie? Rachel Bidikofer is a nationally recognized election forecaster and analyst. She's a senior research fellow at the Niskanen Center and a lecturer at Christopher Newport University. Dr. Wendy Osefo is a Nigerian-American television personality. She's a progressive political commentator and strategist, a professor of education at the Johns Hopkins University, contributor at The Hill, and the founder and CEO of the 1954 Equity Project. Barbara Comstock is a senior advisor with Baker Donaldson and an ABC News contributor. She was elected to Congress in 2014 and served 2 terms representing Virginia's 10th Congressional District, the first woman elected to that seat. She was named one of the top 10 most effective lawmakers in the 115th Congress by the Center for Effective Lawmaking, a joint effort of the University of Virginia and Vanderbilt University, and she's also a resident scholar at UVA this semester. So in August, of course, as we mark the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, it's important to mark that milestone. It's also important to remind ourselves that it did not come immediately for a number of women in this country, notably women of color. Today, women make up just over half of the U.S. population. And despite a historic number of women who were elected to Congress in 2018, women collectively account for just under a quarter of our elected officials in Washington. And there's been a lot of talk, especially in the last week or 10 days or so, about gender and whether a woman can be elected, and whether it's a hurdle in 2020. Senator Bernie Sanders on Sunday was asked about that, since he was involved in the conversation, getting a lot of attention. He told New Hampshire Public Radio, when asked, that every candidate has their own set of problems. He said he did believe that gender was still an obstacle for female politicians, but then noted in terms of those sets of problems, he pointed out his age. He talked about the age of Pete Buttigieg, which could be seen as an issue. I'm curious, and Leslie, I'm going to ask you first, because Leslie brought this up in the green room. She said, I hope we're going to talk about gender and electability. Is gender on par with age in 2020?
Wow, that's a great twist on the question, Erica. Thank you so much. And it's interesting, particularly when first off, thank you all for the opportunity to be here, especially with these esteemed colleagues who I admire so much and the tremendous amount of work they do. The issue with gender has been this false kind of perception that women could not meet the bar. In many ways, there was this perception that women could not raise the money, and particularly when it came to running for president. But what we've seen historically is that people tend to move into partisanship over gender. So they're going to go with their nominee or somebody who's more in line with their value based on those set of criteria versus their gender, and in some cases their age. The difference was when you had Barack Obama, that was a generational election. That was when people were really looking at particularly younger voters for somebody who was more in line with their vision of hope and where they thought America was going versus an older Republican candidate, for example, who represented a way of thinking, a traditional approach to the Republican Party. And where we are now is completely different, but I think Bernie Sanders does have a challenge. He has a problem in some of these mindsets he has, particularly as it relates to women, their electability, and also where women voters feel they are now. I think they feel that their time has come and they are more than capable of being in the White House.
Barbara is the person on this panel who has experience working in Washington. Did you find that women work differently on the Hill?
Well, I would say, first of all, to the initial question too, misogyny is definitely a bipartisan issue. So I experienced it both from Democrat men as well as Republicans. So there is sort of this myth on the partisan basis, and I'll give you an example of a former colleague who had said things like, on TV, he said, well, we got to get, in an election, we got to get her now because she's ambitious, the A word. That's, we got to bump her off. This was, and then he was talking about another person who was running for office. It was a woman, it was Jill Vogel when she was running for lieutenant governor in Virginia. And he said, well, I don't know much about her. We were at a Virginia, it's a Virginia member, at a Virginia member caucus, and he said, I hear she married well. Married well. And when I confronted him on saying both of those things, he denied he said either of them. I said, well, unfortunately, one of them is on TV. So it's on a YouTube. And the other one, yeah, you said it, but you said it in front of a bunch of guys because I was the only woman in the delegation at that point. So I'm the only one. And it's the kind of situation where you don't say, do you realize how outrageous it is what you just said? So I do want to put that out there, that what we're doing, whether it's what Elizabeth Warren is dealing with the Bernie bros, or the fact that the Republican caucus is only 6.5% women, which is why we're not going to have parity anytime soon until you have more Republican women, because I assume Democrat men are not going to give up all of their seats, because right now women are about 38, almost 40% in the House in Congress, but 6.5% on the Republican side. So when you look at our side, the diversity is white men with white hair and white men with gray hair. So that's not good. So it's great to see all these people, all these young women here, because you're the ones who are going to have to change that on both sides. And I think it's important that we have women of diverse views, women of diverse parties, and then women diversity in general, because we know any organization operates better. I mean, there's been lots of studies on this now at Harvard, but also, Northrop Grumman's done these studies. The more diverse your organization is, the more profitable it is. So we need to have Republicans understand, as well as Democrats and our country, the more you bring in people and have a diverse organization, whether it's a defense company or Congress, the better it's going to work. And I certainly found that in doing, I was honored to be one of the most effective legislators, but it was working with a diverse group of people. When I worked on the sexual harassment legislation, it was a great bipartisan experience where I was on the committee that had to deal with it, so I was, one of the managers of the bill and worked a lot on it. And we had a conservative Republican, Bradley Byrne from Alabama, who had been a labor lawyer, and then Jackie Spear from California, one of the most liberal Democrat members who had worked on these issues for years, and then a good friend of mine, Debbie Dingell, and a few other women. And we worked on this together, and we sat with the checklist, and there was nothing we disagreed on what needed to be done. And so that was really, those kind of things you don't hear about a lot. Technology issues, science issues often are bipartisan too. So because I want to give you a little hope here that a lot of the things do get worked on together like that. And that's where I think the future lies, because things like, technology is going to deal with, healthcare issues, with curing, whether it's, cancer or, data amassing, and figuring out cures for cancer or Alzheimer's. And those things are all being done bipartisan. We rarely would be fighting about those things. So, you're seeing this, mess now that's out there, but please don't be discouraged by it. I mean, that's going, and it's not just here in the United States. It's in Europe. You got Boris Johnson. You have Le Pen in France. In Germany, polarized things are going on. This is a temporary, thing going through the body politic universally. It's not just us. So this has happened before. Don't freak out. All the good things that are going on in science and technology and the economy, I do think they will out in the end, and your generation is going to be the one that will make sure that happens.
Wendy, what do you think is missing from the conversation, or who is missing from the conversation as we're talking about how to get more women involved and how to make sure their voices are heard?
Great question. I think women are missing from the conversation. It's one of those things where you want to have diversity, but the people sitting at the table are not diverse. You have to have the faces that you want to see in those conversations. So often we talk about people and we talk to them, but we're not letting them speak for themselves. One of the notions I hate the most is when people say, and I see this with my students or when I hear colleagues say, I want to be a voice for the voiceless. No, just pass the mic. They have a voice.
There's a novel concept.
So no one has to be a savior here. We just have to pull people into the conversation. And I think that when we have this conversation about women and ageism and, we talk about party lines, another thing as a woman of color is, what does that conversation look like? Are we talking about pulling in women, or are we also talking about the needs of minority women? Because those are two separate conversations. So just making sure that we're always inclusive around the discourse of pulling people in and having people sit at the table, because there's so many voices that need to be heard, and we need to make sure that we address those issues head on.
And that, I think, speaks to something that we just heard from Mia Love, too, about not having to fit this mold.
Yeah.
And Rachel, I was eavesdropping on one of Rachel's conversations in the green room, and you were actually talking with Barbara, talking about bringing in more people and making sure that the parties, something that you talk with your students about, making sure that the parties are diverse and that they understand there are a lot of people out there that they could potentially bring in. How important is it that both the Democratic and the Republican parties look at Americans as people, as opposed to, can you check all of these boxes for me?
I mean, it's extremely important. I mean, we really, too, have to be, I think a lot of Americans would be shocked to see the data, right? So one of the things that I like to bring to every conversation is the data. I mean, we are wondering, is there a gender effect in evaluations of female candidates? We know for sure in controlled analyses that women are evaluated, their skills are evaluated as less valuable than men. We know for sure in this Democratic primary that that men are evaluating the female candidates lower than the male candidates. So we know for sure that that there are, gender penalties for female candidates. One of the things that I like to do for my Gen Z students is show them public opinion data on just social issues like the suitability of raising kids and working outside of the home. I think like if I was to poll this room now and ask, what do you guys think the response would be if I asked you, can women be as good of a mother working moms as stay-at-home moms? You'd probably think about 70% of the American public would agree with that. But actually, as late as 2018, that number is about 38%. Okay? And we don't have a good handle on just how prevalent these attitudes still are in our society. Of course, there's a great bifurcation on one variable on that, and that's, of course, age, right? Age is going to be a major factor there. So I think, what we're talking about in terms of gender representation and other diversity issues, some of it is that it's kind of what I call the Thunberg problem. We don't approach it with the proper level of ferocity because we don't quite have a grasp of the crisis level. If we were to continue on the path that we're on now, we'll essentially never hit gender diversity in the Congress. And, as the representative was alluding to, having that woman in the room matters. Having a black female Republican in the room where it happens matters. It's not just a symbolic thing to put somebody like that in a room of powerful deciders who are going to set up the rules of the game. So, I would argue really that's not getting enough attention, and until it does, we really won't be making enough progress.
Leslie, how do you encourage more women to run?
In many cases, you saw tremendous success in 2018 with Democratic women running. And one of the things I'm watching is how many of them are going to continue to move forward. And Barbara is exactly right, Representative is exactly right, in the sense that Republican women, there is a massive gap. And a lot of that starts with party infrastructure. There were many cases where minorities, and could be communities of color or it could be women, that the way that they won, in many cases as Republicans, they raised money outside the traditional system. It was not until the advent of really social media where you could raise, for example, there are many candidates who raised 70, 80% of their dollars outside of their state, outside of their congressional district, because they could, appeal to other like-minded women or individuals on issues that they cared about. If they were talking about human trafficking, if they were talking about sexual assault, if they were talking about drunk driving, they could find a broader base of support, and those dollars would come in, whether they were small or very meaningful. That allowed a lot more power for these women. So one, their party infrastructure, there's tremendous pressure on the parties to look for a diversity of candidates. Many women are running their households, they're running their small businesses, they're juggling so many different things that they don't immediately think of public policy, of running for office, of throwing their hat in the ring as someone.
I was going to say, one of the differences, I think, between why there are fewer Republican women than Democrat is there's not as many Republican women who've run for state and local office. I was in the Virginia General Assembly before I ran for Congress. Now, I had worked for Congressman Frank Wolf, who I replaced. I had been on presidential campaigns. I had been a TV spokesperson for people, and I'd done all those things. But the thing that was most impactful for my running for Congress was having been a state representative. And the most impactful thing for running for that was I had been a precinct captain. I had fundraised for other candidates, and I had actually done the things that you have to do to be a candidate. Oftentimes people kind of step forward, a lot of men do this and say, well, I'm a poster child for running. I have all these things, and aren't I great? And I went to the Harvard Government School for candidacy. But they haven't done anything in their community, and they don't know sort of how to get nominated, and they haven't kind of done anything there. So you have to do those kind of, you have to walk before you can run. And when you look at the numbers on the Democrat side, a huge number of them have been in state and local office. And I know when I was recruited actually by a man to run for state office, something it was sort of an accidental career, detour. It's a $17,000 job. So it wasn't high on my list of things to do, right? I had my own business, I was making money, but then they explained to me, well, you can still do your own business, you can still make money, and then this is a part-time job. I said, oh, okay, this is nice. So that's sort of how I went in. Now, it did end up being a full-time job. They didn't tell me that part. But I really enjoyed that as much as anything, and it gives you that skill set. I mean, all those things that I had done for other candidates, I now was able to do for myself. I mean, you can look at so many candidates who run, and they've never even contributed a dime to anybody. If you haven't written a check, and I would encourage everyone here, if you have a presidential candidate or a congressional candidate or a Senate candidate or a local candidate that you are supporting, write them at least a $10 or $15. I mean, everybody can afford to do $10. Be invested in it. When I first worked for Frank Wolf when I was a mom with 3 kids and I was volunteering and I had no money. I was a law student. My husband was working 3 jobs and I'm trying to finish through law school. I scraped up $25 to go to the event, and then I said, hey, can I help? I'll volunteer, I'll work the desk, I'll do something to contribute. And those were the skill sets that women candidates need, and oftentimes they ignore that. And so a lot of guys do too, but I think, when I'm just always surprised when any candidate comes to me, they haven't even done the basic things to be a candidate.
I just wanted to close on one point. I thought she raised a very important thing that the men don't think about it. So that's exactly right. Men go, well, they have no qualifications in this space, and they go, oh, okay, I'm ready to run. But women will all consistently tell you, oh, I'm not prepared. I don't have those kind of skill sets. I don't see myself in that role. And that distinction is probably the first challenge, is women need to be able to think they can.
Which also raises the question of, is the bar lower for men?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And
because they they self-select more often, and women go.
There's actually like a wealth of political science research on this, and the Congresswoman, if the people who did this research were in this room, they would have jumped up in the chair because she said this thing, and what she said was, they recruited me to run, right, for the seat. And that's like, there's many takeaways from this literature that I wish I had time to summarize for you. But the key is, for women, they have to be asked to run. And as you just pointed out, the men are like, I've never done any of this stuff, but you know what, I'd make a great congressman, So they overestimate their skill. I urge you to read that literature. I'll try to thread about it on Twitter. But here's one thing I want to make another point on. Because of the money system that we have now, the parties are in a pickle where they must recruit candidates that can fundraise big, large chunks. And that is going to disadvantage women, especially because they are not as likely to have those networks of big fundraising networks. And that's why we're seeing more business, more men candidates. And, a party with the Republicans know they have a diversity problem, but if they have candidate A, white dude with business connections, and candidate B, diverse female but no business connections, often the other guy's going to win because of that money problem that the parties face.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, one of the reasons I started a young women's leadership program 7 years ago that's now housed at George Mason. I'll give a little plug for that too, and anyone who'd like to be involved in that, we'd love to have you. But it's for high school girls, and one of the reasons I started it is read Lean In, all that literature, and I realized I was recruited. The Speaker of the House at the time, who was a male, called me, asked me to, run, and then I hadn't decided yet, but he announced to a room full of people, oh, Barbara's running. Now, he didn't do it intentionally. He thought I had actually made the decision, so he didn't intentionally push me in the pool. He thought I was already in the pool. And then everyone said, yay, okay. And so I said, okay, I guess I'll run.
Well, clearly he has an eye for talent.
Yeah, but I realized I wouldn't have done that but for somebody recruiting me, and that shouldn't happen. Right. So the reason I started my program was, women should be doing what men do and say, okay, I can do this. And you don't have to, as Lean In points out, if you haven't read Lean In, please read it. Young women, there's one for college-age women. It's Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, and my son works there, I'll acknowledge. But it's a great book about how women sometimes hold themselves back. And I know that was certainly my experience. And certainly in politics, a good friend of mine used to say, politics isn't so much Democrat versus Republican as men versus women. And that's definitely, and so the women friendships, you need to have that going in if you're going to run. I think that's important in business, in any kind of career, whether you're in the media, you want to have those friendships and have your group of women who are your support system.
Yeah. In terms of the friendships, too, this makes me think back to, remember the budget impasse of 2011, which almost seems idyllic at this point? I remember that summer spending a lot of time in Washington and talking with different lawmakers. And one Democratic senator was telling me she refused to do this on camera, and I said, we'll do it from far away. We won't mic you, but just a faraway picture. I will leave them both unnamed, but she would run regularly with another female Republican senator. And she told me about how the female senators would get together, bipartisan lunches, how important it was, to your point too, how much work was done there. What was interesting is that she didn't want to exploit that relationship on camera. She said she just felt it would be too much, and that's not what she wanted it to be about. I saw a different message as a journalist saying, hey, isn't this a great message that you can work together? Wendy, I'm wondering if what's being put out there is what people need to hear. If women are holding back, right, as we often do in terms of touting our own accomplishments, are they also holding back on touting these bipartisan, perhaps meetings, friendships that they have? Are they holding back on saying, I can represent your party, but I can also represent all of my constituents, whether they are carrying the same card as me or not?
Great question. So I think that boils down to social capital, right? Like you're looking at what a woman is able to bring to the table, and not what they know, but who they know. And as women, we do hold back. And whether that is holding back ourselves for our next career, or holding back our Rolodex of friends that could potentially pull in millions of dollars for us, or our Rolodex of friends that includes somebody across the aisle who can help us pass through a bill. It's something that we have to work on. But being that all of the women on this panel are agreeing, I don't know if it's something within our DNA that it just is what it is. But we do see this high level of bravado and confidence when it comes to men. So many times we can, see breaking news coming out of the Hill, and you will have a man say, yeah, and he starts listing the names of his friends across the aisle who are helping him with this bill. And my first thought is, I don't care. But they're doing that for a reason. They're doing that to not only pump up themselves, but to say, I can get this done, and I can get this done with the help of other people. And I wish that women would do a better job of not only acknowledging who we are and the benefits that we bring to any situation, but also the resources that we bring, because that can move the needle both ways.
Right. Yeah. No. And I when I do speak to women audiences specifically, one of the other diversifying Congress, state legislatures, boardrooms issues for women is the lack of the embedded network, and that's so what she's speaking of. Women need to be intentional about these things. So the man might walk out and start listing all these partnerships as he does it subconsciously in a way that he's signaling, hey, I can get this done. And because we don't have that in our socialization, because it's definitely not genetic, ladies, okay, it's socialization. We need to teach each other to be intentional about that, to be intentional about credit claiming, and then when people get hammered for credit claiming, because trust me on this, they will, we need to hold each other up and support them. But yes, a lot of intentionality, especially in that network building for especially extremely successful women, building networks and pulling other women with them.
Yeah,
and we need to have, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I just find it fascinating she talks about that, because there's so many cases women would not take the credit until it was accomplished. They would never say, we're going to do this and that, until they actually signed the bill into law, got it out of committee, got it for a House vote. Then they're willing to show some of their cards. But before that, that's why women are so dynamic, and they are always the outsider in an elected office, because they come with a collaborative spirit. They come in regardless of party ID, and they work together to solve the family problem, right? And that's how they talk about it. They kind of congeal in that sense to be effective. It would never claim credit had they not done so yet.
And too much, right, these days you see it's just people who are on TV. Those are the ones who are known. And I'll give you an example. It's my party. Jim Jordan, I don't think he's ever passed a bill. He's been there 12 years. He's on TV a lot. And I know when I was in Congress, people, why aren't you on TV more? You used to do TV. I said, well, because I'm trying to get a non-earmark for Memorial Bridge so we can improve it, and I'm trying to get these bills passed. And if I spend time going, off the hill and working on these things, I'm not in my district, I'm not doing these things. So we kind of give credit to the TV class of people, and usually the people, there are certainly exceptions, but they're kind of like the Kardashians, on TV. Yep. They're people, they want to be they like run for office literally so they can be on TV. Mm-hmm. I mean, Louis Gohmert also hasn't passed a lot of bills. He just loves being on TV. He'll just go down at the end of the day on C-SPAN. He's a Republican, so I'm bashing my own side, but he just wants to be on TV all the time. But separate, so don't look at the people who are actually getting things done. Aside from that, but also we need more women running campaigns, doing I wasn't supposed to win any of my races, but all of my campaigns except my first one, I had women campaign managers. I had women leadership in my campaign. In my offices, I paid women more than men. I mean, it just worked out. So we have to recruit women and get women, and a lot of times it was hard. I had to sort of drag them like, you need to do this, and encourage them to get out there and realize you can run this, and you can do it. And I know my campaign manager and chief of staff, she was very good about also recruiting women. So once you're there, you need to bring in more women too, more diversity. When you're appointing people to things, look and see where can we find more diversity and talent, because if you're looking around and everybody looks like you need to go back to the drawing board and find some other people to be as part of your circle.
I'm curious now, especially, and I'll start with you, being, sort of back on the other side now and looking in, what is the state of the Republican Party in your eyes today?
Oh, that's
well, like I said, I mean, this is
5 words or less.
She needs the Rodney Dangerfield.
It is an international issue. When you look, like I said, with Boris Johnson and Le Pen in France, so you have the conservative parties, but also the body politic going through something right now. So we're going through that, and I do think it's temporary. But the Republican Party will not be in the majority again until it looks different, until we have more diversity. And one of the things that's going to happen is redistricting is going to happen in 2021. And our country is becoming more integrated in neighborhoods. Still not that, if you go to New York City, you're not gonna have any Republican districts. There's nobody there, they all agree with each other. I think it's more fun to live in an area where you have a lot of diversity, and that is, the area of Virginia that I lived in, that's what it's like. And I grew up as a Democrat in Massachusetts, so I was used to, and then I became a Republican. So I'm used to crossing over in a lot of different communities, and I think that's one of the reasons we haven't had a woman president yet, because we don't have women in these more crossover areas. You have to, if you're going to be president, you have to cross over a lot of, different communities. You can't, that's why, Elizabeth Warren has been elected in Massachusetts. Not hard for a Democrat to do, although they had been bad about electing women over the years. Republicans can get elected in Alabama, although, we managed to mess that one up. So you have to have, I think women governors are going to be an area where you're going to find a future president. So I think Nikki Haley, does have sort of that crossover. Kind of, it's that Bill Clinton model. He was somebody who had, been all around the world, but then he was in Arkansas and he understood the rural culture, but he also understood, his party that was mostly bi-coastal, and he was able to cross over like that. And I think, and the same thing with George Bush. He was Texas, but then he had, also been on the East Coast and grown up there. So I think you have to have that crossover, and until women move into more communities and more diverse communities, I think it's going to be harder to have a woman president. And I think that's, like Kamala Harris getting elected in California is not hard, but having a California person get elected in Iowa is going to be harder. That's why I think Amy Klobuchar is probably the strongest sort of crossover candidate. And it was so stupid for the New York Times to pick two people. Like, you couldn't pick one woman, you had to do two, because woman couldn't, you had to have two women instead of one man. And I thought that was that's a slight to women. Just pick one woman and, give them that endorsement.
Can I say something about crossover? I think that the elephant in the room is, yes, you can have the crossover appeal. You could, someone who can be elected in Iowa and those quote unquote flyover states. But something that we often do not talk about when we talk about women is, what are they going to do with their families? Unfortunately, when you look at a woman, you have to look at her as in isolation. But if a woman comes in and wants to be a president and she's married, and she has young children, then that's a whole nother conversation. When we look at Amy Klobuchar, when we look at Warren, when we look at Kamala Harris, when we look at Hillary Clinton, there's a certain pedigree and background, familial background, that comes with each of them. None of us have talked about that. And I'm very aware of that because as I stand here before you, I am a woman, I'm a mom, but my children are 6, 4, and 6 months. Could I become president? No, because my pedigree and my background is she will pay more time taking care of raising her child than paying attention to the needs of this country. So when we talk about women, there's also a certain type of woman that can assume these roles. And that's something that's often not talked about because that is seen in every job, not just for presidency, not just for Congress, but even if you want to be a teacher. What are your outside obligations and how is it going to affect your job obligations? And that is something that is hardly ever addressed.
That's a great point, too, when you talk about you see it in all different areas.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a number of you have dealt with this, but I remember anecdotally having a conversation on the playground, and there was a fellow parent who was complaining, saying, I was so excited I got this teacher for my child this year, but she's pregnant, and now she's going to leave. And I thought to myself, but you've been pregnant, and you were here to pick up your child. And she was so incensed that this woman was going to leave on maternity leave because she thought she had hit the jackpot with her. So I'm curious, when we talk about the states of the parties, how much is that, Wendy? A conversation within the Democratic Party, as we just talked about the Republican Party, how much is that, big elephant, or I guess, donkey in the room in this case, how much is that actually a conversation?
Well, we did have on the Republican side, Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's still in Congress, but she was our number 3 conference chair when we were in the majority, I guess number 3 or 4, but she had her 3 children while she was in Congress. Her husband was in the military, and she had a very helpful husband. So it often is which I did too. My husband's a teacher, and so he was able, with his schedule, to often help me. So I think that's also sort of a family decision. How do you do this? How do you make your career work, both of your careers work at different times? So you have to make different choices at different times, depending on your financial situation, your family situation, health. But, she was, when she went into Congress, she was single. She said, I didn't even think I was going to be married.
And that's the thing. Yeah. It's how you come in as a candidate. We can't, we don't know what's going to happen 15 years from now, but how do you come in as a candidate? I had all 3 of my kids during my career. I'm sure that my job is probably like, darn it. We wish we knew that she wanted to have kids. Yeah. But it's how do you come in as a candidate? Do you come in single? Do you come in, more seasoned and you're probably like, I don't want to have any children? It's all about how you are seen when you are that person, and are you going to change? It's all about imagery. The same reason that a lot of times we say we do not want to have a male president that is not married, right? It's a sense of having someone in there because as a man, if you're older and you have a wife, it denotes a sense of responsibility. There are these image things that we have as a society, and when we look at our candidates, whether we adhere to them or not, we cannot deny the fact that they do exist. So, Democrats, I don't think it's necessarily a party issue, but it's just a society thing. But it's definitely something that we should talk about when we're saying, well, why don't more women run? Because oftentimes as women, we believe we have to make a choice between career or family.
Yeah, and this is actually, again, quantified in not just politics, every field, every industry, the academy, which is referring to, professors, higher ed, corporate world. The institutions themselves are actually becoming very progressive. I know when the blue wave came through Virginia and this freshman class of women were sworn in 2017, I think one made national headlines because she had her infant on her shoulder as she took the oath. The institutions are very progressive, but the public is not, right? And I just alluded to that general social survey data that shows how hostile, it's not 70% of people who think that, I'm is equally competent mom as a stay-at-home mom because I'm a working mom, right? So we know for sure, in terms of promotion, in terms of money, in terms of, rank, all of these things are affected by the fact that you're a woman with potential child-bearing, implications.
But that's where I think women need to pull other women who are in there and already in a position. You need to make sure your team has women. You need to recruit women. You need to go out and tell your story and say, you can do this. We have single moms who are in Congress now. We have, certainly all kinds of different situations, but oftentimes the media doesn't tell their story. So we need to tell their story and say, because, I didn't have young children when I ran. So if I talked to candidates with young children, I said, let me have you talk to Kathy, because Kathy's gone through, you got to find, it's kind of like when you're a new mom, you got to talk to a new mom. If you're a new cancer, dealing with cancer, you got to talk to a cancer survivor. How do I get through this? So we need to tell those stories more and put women in touch with other women similarly situated, and then bring more women into the fold.
There was a very particular example in 2008 when I was on air talking about just kind of the battleground of the election, and they said, well, they at this point they now had Sarah Palin as the vice presidential on the vice presidential ticket, and they said, well, how could a woman with a child with special needs possibly be able to devote her time to being vice president? And the question was so stark that I just had to stop, and I was talking about something completely different, and I had to stop and say that's just out of bounds for all of these reasons. But it was a moment, like in this collective moment, we're like aghast, and that to think that we're so progressive, or we think we are. We always play this game of like, oh, there's a woman on a ticket, there's a minority on the ticket, there's this and that. But are we really opening the idea of what that means as a full body? And sometimes we're not. So we had to take a responsibility in a moment, kind of a gut check with ourselves to say, what are we exactly asking? Because she has support systems. We have support systems. If it was reversed and the president candidate, the nominee, had a child with Down syndrome, or especially
if the candidate was a man, I think.
Yeah, if they were a man, I don't think that would be even a question.
So it would be celebrated.
Absolutely.
We've been electing men with small children to the White House for a very long time.
That's right.
So in looking at what's interesting is what I'm hearing too in the discussion is in a lot of ways not surprising, although I have to say that 38% number is still stuck in my head that you offers, Rachel, just in terms of society.
But I think that part is different though now. Than your generation, you're not going to be that way, and don't be that way. My three children, if the kids are, my daughter has two little kids, and if they're sick, she isn't automatically the one who stays home. Her husband, we have more flexibility in the workplace for moms and dads. And so sometimes it's dad who stays home, sometimes it's mom, sometimes it's now Nana, because I can help. So that is not automatically what happens anymore. And you've got to start that at the beginning when you're a parent, to say you're not automatically going to be the one who, because if you have a job or if you're going to be in the workplace, you make those choices. But I do think you have to make that change yourself. I know Sheryl Sandberg in Lean In, I'll recommend it again, our biggest, she talks about, make your partner a partner and make sure your partner is helping and that you're collaborating in different ways to make that whole system work.
That's the beauty of challenging gender roles as much as it gets kind of lauded, laughed at. It lends itself well to being ridiculed, especially in certain right-wing media circles. But the fact of the matter matter is, especially in Republican politics, if we want to diversify the Republican Party, you have to, Gen Z, millennial parents, but Gen Z, force men to take care of small children so that you guys can go run the world. I mean, it's just the way it goes. My husband takes care of my kids,
And they
so
can
that
change
I
diapers.
do all this.
They know how to deal with crap.
Well, it's also modeling too. It's what they see, right? So it's what your children see.
Yeah.
Even more so than saying it to them. When they see equal parenting,
Right. It's about
whatever your household
normalizing
may
it,
be,
right.
when they see
Yeah.
that. So I'm curious, given everything that we've just talked about, as we look at the Democratic field, there's some new CNN polling out just this morning, and Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are basically, when you figure in the margin of error, they are about equal with about a
They're
quarter.
older than Barack Obama. It's amazing.
Elizabeth Warren is in the top 3, but with 14% versus 27% for Bernie Sanders, 24% for Joe Biden. And rounding out that top 5, you've got Pete Buttigieg at 11% and Mike Bloomberg at 5%. We have lost almost every minority in that field, right? When you look at the candidates who are there, Andrew Yang doesn't get a ton of attention. He's pulling at 4% with Amy Klobuchar in this one. But I'm wondering, Leslie, as we look at that, right, and we talk about the comfort level of voters and what they're used to seeing and what they're comfortable seeing in leadership roles, is the Democratic field reflecting more a comfort level, or is it reflecting what perhaps younger voters and younger members of the Democratic Party would like to see that ticket represent?
I think what it's reflecting right now is a comfortability of what we have seen historically. But I also think that what cannot be lost is, for the Democrats, and this is something that I have argued with lots of people on the Hill, is we have to change our message. And that message right now is just anyone but Trump. And so if you have that message of anyone but Trump, then you're looking at any candidate that you think can beat Trump. I don't know if those candidates would be in the lead if Trump was not in office. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you're. I think it's. I think you need a cranky 70-year-old man
to beat
Trump.
another cranky 70-year-old man. If we're just being honest,
Yeah,
right?
with bad hair.
Right, with bad hair. So that's what we're doing here. And so it's just.
I think they're absolutely wrong. I mean, not that anyone takes Democrat advice from me, but I think that's absolutely wrong.
Right.
But I think they're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And it's very strange that
And so that's what's
I
going
don't understand that phenomenon, and I feel like, yes, I agree.
So that's what I think. I think that those people are polling the highest, but honestly, all things being equal, if Trump was in office, would those be our candidates? Would that be our choice? Absolutely not. I heard some people say that, they loved Cory Booker, or they love Kamala Harris, or they love Amy Klobuchar. But then the next question immediately is, but do you think they can beat Trump? That's every conversation. Mm-hmm. So we are now looking at people from our own lens of, is this candidate viable? But then also, who do we think can beat Trump? Biden, though, may be the wild card, only because when you look at his association, which is what he's really riding on here, honestly, his association with Barack Obama, there may be people who may naturally like him because of his affiliation with the Obama legacy. But other than that, I would put my left earring to the fact that these people, most of them would not be where they are polling-wise.
So, I'm sorry. It's just this is my area of expertise, so I'm going to jump in. I'm not going to get popular here, but I am going to gain an earring.
No, you're not.
Let me see those earrings. Ooh, that's nice. That's nice. I hope my lobes can support those. This is literally what I do as my living, as my PhD in. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in this room, the fact that you're in this room, you guys are not typical Americans. You're not typical even Democratic primary voters. You are the intellectual, politically engaged 0.0001%. And what we do when we're in that that group is we tend to analyze things from that perspective, and it does cause us sometimes to get into the weeds a little bit. But here's what's driving the Biden-Sanders thing is the fact of the matter is, when I run this Virginia poll here in a couple of weeks, I'm going to cold ask the respondents how many candidates they can name, and I just did a little mini experiment with my students on this, and the modal answer will be, even at this stage, even at this point, probably Iowa caucus will have occurred, modal, they'll be able to name Biden and Sanders, and maybe Warren and Buttigieg and maybe Klobuchar, okay? The rest of them, no, okay? There was like 2 or 3 kids in the class that could name 10. Certainly none of them could name anything more than 14. There was 25 total, as you know. And so what's driving the primacy for these 2 candidates is the same thing that drives it in every cycle, and that's incumbency and name ID. And you are right, for Biden, it's the vice presidentship, it's for his support coming from people of color is that Obama legacy. And what bled the diversity out of the field was that lock of diverse support for Biden. And then with Sanders, since he was the runner-up, presidential nominations just have a long history of giving the person who was the runner-up the last time an edge in that next cycle. So when we look, though, like out there in regular America, to kind of give you guys a little sense of what I'm talking about, in one of the national tracking surveys that has been tracking people who say they're voting in the Democratic primary, who are, by the way, also more special people, not regular Americans, because they're going to vote in this Democratic presidential primary, so they're a little bit more engaged than the average American. Even amongst those people, Liz Warren is still about 20% don't know, never heard of. Okay? Pete Buttigieg is just now getting below 40%. Okay, so it's really, really tough for us, just in our perspectives, to understand, like, out there, how civically illiterate our country is. But, and that's a tough diagnosis to hear. But the fact of the matter is, our country is, in a civic literacy crisis. And one of the ways that it manifests is this attention and this, ability to articulate who's in this primary. And believe it or not, 10% of the country out there in these general election polls that I monitor, 10% don't know who Joe Biden is. Okay? And these are people who profess that they will be voting in the election.
The interesting part, what hasn't been mentioned, and with Iowa starting, that's exactly right. It kind of building upon that, the low information voters that don't know, haven't heard the name, and people think of name ID like we just talked about. Iowa caucuses are such an unusual thing because people get out on a cold, snowy night and caucus and fight it out with each other at all these numerous caucuses around the state. And Bernie Sanders has the advantage of having built and run an operation that understands how to caucus. Iowa is just such a unique thing. But there's a big divide and a fight happening within the Democratic Party of this establishment candidate. Are we going to go down that road? Mainstream.
And Hillary just gave him a big gift, attacking him too.
Yeah. Or this progressive pull to the left socialist kind of movement, and you have that has all the young vote, a lot with being Bernie Sanders has that the young support that Barack Obama had, they're all in there with Bernie. Or you get, so if it is somebody like Joe Biden who will do well when he gets to South Carolina, for a lot of the reasons you talked about, particularly African American women and black voters who are going to support, he's earned and retained their support. It's going to change that dynamic, but when are we going to run into another convention like we had with Hillary Clinton and the Bernie Sanders folks who were fighting it out at convention? They eventually came together, but there were many people who sat on their hands because they didn't like the nominee. We see it on the right and the left. But
don't you think this time, that we'll have kind of the highest turnout we've had in recent history?
Yeah, this could be very different because, this is where my election forecasting work and theory is, advancing and talking about. But, this, in 2016, the Democratic coalition, and they had a lot of data and forecasting models in polling to make them feel this way, felt it was in the bag, so that unity never happened. And the Clinton campaign team made a giant strategic blunder, and they didn't send a olive branch to that disaffected millennial Gen Z coalition, and went with the like a Clinton-esque type vice presidential pick, which made strategic sense if you're thinking about the environment at that time. I mean, no Republicans of note would come to the RNC convention. I know our keynote address speaker said, "I was at the Republican convention, not this last one, but the one before," right? So we kind of forget how this hostile takeover of the Republican Party occurred, because now they are so lockstep with the president. But boy, it was a hostage situation all the way through that general election, actually. In the case of this cycle, right now we are in this progressives versus the mainstream fight to the finish. It is going to be a horrible, bloody, mess. But ultimately, my expectation is, because Trump is now a thing and not a hypothetical, we probably will see more unity in that Democratic coalition come together in the summer, as the threat of Trump becomes, the focus again, and not internal party factionalism.
So then, what do they, as you see the Democratic Party coming more together, right? Once there is finally a nominee, let's say it's Bernie Sanders, who's far more progressive than a Joe Biden. If it is Senator Sanders, after you've had that bloody fight, and once there's a candidate, what is that messaging? Does it then slowly shift to bring in more voters and become a more moderate approach?
My guess is if it was Sanders, and you already see this with Sanders, is and Warren both are triangulating as much as they can back towards the middle, right?
But that's not possible with Bernie.
Well, you would, Ronald Reagan, believe it or not, when he ran in 1980, I mean, his whole, his candidacy, actually, in terms of ideology, he can't win. He's an ideologue. He's got this crazy vision for what to do to the tax system, keeping in mind at that point we had this entirely different tax structure in the country that Reagan envisioned changing, you'd be surprised what people can accomplish in terms of triangulation. But what really matters, whether it's Biden the moderate or Sanders the ideologue on the main ticket, ultimately what the Democrats need to recognize is their party is the party of diversity, and there better be racial diversity on the ticket if they want to maximize their probability of winning. And I think, right now the front runners are all white. They might be white women, but they're all white. And so, I think the vice presidential pick then at that point becomes very critical to them. And they really need to be looking towards people like Stacey Abrams or Kamala Harris or somebody that, recognizes that this is a party of a diverse coalition, not, just of white people.
I think I was going to say, if the Dem nominee, the candidate, comes out, and let's say it's Biden, or let's say it's Bernie Sanders, their vice presidential pick has to be a woman.
Yeah, I agree.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah, no
in
doubt.
order to win,
she's right.
you have to have a woman.
Now you can have your earring back.
Thank you.
Exactly. It's interesting on the vice presidential pick, because if it is Biden, I do see Klobuchar being that dark horse because of Minnesota, because we're talking about
that's the interesting trap,
it's the
right?
It's the non-college educated white voters that Trump does very well in this conservative populist movement. That's the group that moved over to him. That's where Biden is saying he can be competitive. And you're looking at those 10 states, when we talk about some of those battleground states, the Ohio, and certainly the Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Trump almost won by 2 points. He was within that area. Those were, if you look at those 10 states, McCain lost 8 of them, won 2. Trump won 8. And lost 2. He flipped it in that number of years.
And he still can lose, if he took the same states and lose Michigan and Pennsylvania, he still wins.
He'd still win.
So it is.
It's the way that he won those states that matters, though. So, yes, when I said it was a trap, I mean, literally it's a trap in terms of this ignoring the needs of diversity on the ticket, because Klobuchar is a very attractive candidate if you think the pathway back is this crossover voter, right? But if you look into the data and you realize, no, you had all these Democrats who wasted protest ballots, you had languished turnout in the suburbs of Chicago, and in the cities of Chicago, suburbs of Wisconsin from the suburbs of Chicago and Detroit and Philadelphia, and then you had, all of this, independent, independents who were, not all independents are moderates. Many of them don't like the party system, but they're not moderates at all, right? So, the crossover appeal of can you win white college-educated, non-college educated, mostly men, back from Trump, maybe with Sanders. Biden thinks I can win those people back. I'm skeptical. Certainly not without Rick Wilson running your ad campaign, I can tell you that. But I think the easier path for Democrats is just blowing up that Obama, redo the Obama coalition. I mean, Obama, in 2008, here's a fun fact, Obama won in 2008 with independents, right? And the coalition. In 2012, he won despite losing independents because of the coalition. I mean, it's just so much untapped potential.
So it also raises the question of where efforts should be focused, right? Which we're touching on a little bit. But there's always a tipping point state, right, in every election. So last time around it was Wisconsin, which I believe it was 0.77%, right, which is what led to this tipping point. And then before it, Colorado, Iowa, Ohio, Florida, all held that distinction. So as we're looking at this, and Leslie, I'll throw this one to you, I mean, which state do you think will be that tipping point state in 2020?
I think we're going back to those same number of states. You talked about Florida, the president's spending a lot of time there, changed address there. This is a critical state. It has been. It's economically and ethnically diverse. It provides a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities, but the president's going to be moving forward, I think, very competitively there. With a suburban women angle was the area that Barack Obama did extremely well in. We hear a lot about it. We have an expert right here who understands suburban women in Virginia, a state like this.
Yeah, they don't like Trump.
They don't like Trump, and that's an area that's hard to close. But that would be one of the areas. Suburban women in many of those areas, whether you're talking about Michigan, whether you're talking about Wisconsin, certainly Florida.
And is there? Thank you guys for coming. Is there, in terms of the suburban women who may not like President Trump, is the messaging getting to them about what their alternatives are if they want one?
One thing we're looking at, what I pay attention to, is where's the economic indicator in each of those states. So if people feel over 50% that the economy is going well, that their jobs are good, that they're moving and advancing forward better than they were 4 years ago, for example, that's going to be a really big driver if they're going to continue to ride this effort with the president or change midstream. And historically, voters, especially in a good economy, don't want to change. So you've got a leadership style race. It's not one about policy. We're not talking about policy. We're talking about style of Donald Trump, and also strong economic numbers. Those are very big.
And his problem, and Rachel probably know better, but I know certainly in Virginia, his policy, the policies say tax cuts, regulate, business-friendly things. Those things are 10 points to 15 points more popular than he is personally.
Right.
So to have this good of an economy and to have a toss-up election is unusual.
Yeah,
but I do, and you've looked at the intensity, and that's the
you're going to actually really love this. You're going to hate it, but you're going to love it. This analysis I have forthcoming in the New Republic looks at all the districts, but it looks at obviously the 10th, and so it is. So in the suburbs, you have this pool of voters, right? And there's these suburban women and suburban disaffected college voters. There's a pile of them. They were like, Trumpism, I was voting GOP, But really what we're looking at in 2018 is this story of lazy Gen Z and millennials who now own homes because they're 40 millennials. They're not the laptop tutor college students. They're the homeowners that are going bald and have children.
Hey.
And they have not always been that engaged in politics, and they lit up like a candle in 2018. Like I knew they would, and I, sorry, for Representative Comstock, knew the 10th district in particular was just going to be a major blaze. And when we look at what happened in the 10th district, it is a story of these new voters. Maybe they were casual voters before, maybe they didn't vote at all, showing up and changing the demographic composition of the electorate to make it more Democratic friendly, both with base Democrats, but also independents, right? So these big turnout surges amongst independents. And so when you look at the swing of independents, it's not a fixed pool of independents who have changed their mind or might be like secured by good economic performance. It's a whole different pool.
But where are those people? Because we are in the swing states, because Virginia's not in play.
No, they're everywhere. They're all across America, right?
So those are in
swing state has the Philadelphia suburbs, the Detroit suburbs, the places where there's not enough of them, or Indiana, Missouri. Those places are moving the other way.
It's tougher.
Right. Ohio's a to be continued place. And then in the long term, because we're talking about a story, we're talking about a couple chapters in a long story of this long-term realignment in which the Democrats went from a rural party to an urban suburban party, and the Republicans went from a urban and suburban party to a rural party, right? In the long term, I think the Midwest is going to be a problem for Democrats, but not yet. Okay, it's not yet, and not under the conditions in which you have this kerosene effect on turnout. But I would close on this one note. I luckily came across this great research from another political scientist named Davin Phoenix, who theoretically was able to explain to me what I had been seeing in my data, which was that white women, especially college-educated women, are, explosively turning out because of Trump. So, like the people that Klobuchar might be the best at pulling in, okay? But people of color, it's not that they're not responding, Latinos especially, they're responding to the Trump effect, but the effect is like half of what you're getting out of these white college-educated voters. And the reason is, and according to Davin Phoenix's research, and he is a scholar of color, is because the expectations from the system are different for people of color. Absolutely. And so the backlash effect is lesser, right? Because they're just used to dealing with a system that sucks, basically, okay? And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh my God, that's it. That's why I'm seeing this in the data. I'm seeing this muted effect. It's there, but it's not as big. And so when I say that the strategic mistake that I'm looking for the Democrats to make is to ignore people of color in their coalition, that's what I mean, okay? Yeah.
And the demographics are, we should point out, it's not just ignoring people of color, but as we're talking about the shift of the parties, right, urban, suburban, and rural, there's also a shift in the demographics of the country, and where people are moving to and where they're living, but the stories that they're bringing with them in terms of where they're coming from. And I think back to the backlash after 2016, and this talk about coastal elites, and all conversations that were important to have. But I read this one piece that was written by a gentleman who'd grown up in the Midwest, happened to get a job in Manhattan, moved to New York, and said, can we just stop, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but said, can we stop trying to, again, put everybody in a mold and put them in a camp and talk about why we're all at each other's throats, and think about the stories that we all have that got us here. I still get my family home in the Midwest, but I live in New York City now, and that's where I'm making my living, and I'm successful. Does that make me a bad person?
No, and after redistricting, we'll be more diverse. We'll have more diverse districts.
It will help.
So both parties are going to have to deal with that.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing.
Do you think they're preparing for it? As they need to be?
No, because our caucus doesn't have anybody in those districts. They will learn after redistricting that, because the country long-term in the next 20, 30 years is going to look more like Virginia does. Atlanta suburbs are looking like that. North Carolina is looking like that. Iowa is going to look like that.
Texas.
Utah is looking. So in Arizona, a lot of California people are leaving because, the economy. They're moving into Arizona. So Arizona, I think, is going to be one of the tipping point states. Don't you all think that?
Yes. And so Arizona probably is going to flip to the president and both senators. That's crazy, right? But after 2020, I mean, that's
And I think Trump has accelerated some of
Yes.
those things. And then, but after redistricting, everybody's going to have to regroup, and it's not
Yeah.
going to, this Bernie Trump thing,
Yes.
it's going to have to be, well, most of us live somewhere in between.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
We're not out there. So how do we deal with that? And I think redistricting will force that in a good way.
Yeah, and we want that. Yeah, we
Yeah.
want as much competition in congressional seats as we possibly can get. And you know what? It will be great for you, Rep. Comstock, because I am sure in your efforts to preserve your time in Congress, you had many colleague conversations in which you tried to explain the difference between the 10th district and, you know, the 5th or one of the other gerrymandered districts in Virginia. And they didn't get a sympathetic ear, but one day maybe I'll be a little bit more sympathetic to the plight of a swing district, right?
Well, and I mean, like I said initially, the more diversity you have in your organization, the more successful
so
you're going to
good.
be. So that's
Yeah.
why I think the Republican Party won't get there until we have a
The
more.
interesting part that Trump, and you talk, and she talked about Trump accelerating it. The idea was 10 years ago, especially in the Bush coalition, that the mountainous West was going to be competitive. We were seeing Latino Republican governors. We were seeing the rise of Hispanic, even in Nevada. We were seeing Hispanic governors that were Republican. That the next step, it's kind of all those steps. The next step is to be nominated to a national party ticket. The next step is to either to get them to Washington in some way or as a cabinet secretary and move those people through. But Trump changed all of that.
Killed
It killed it. You have a lot of people, and traditionally when a new Republican or Democratic administration comes in, you credential the individuals that worked in the last part. You move them through the system so they're better qualified, better positioned to go run for office in their states. We're not doing that with
Well,
the
and I
Trump.
think
There's just a lot of vacancies.
The coastal elite problem that the Democrats have, Trump has highlighted with the working class, and it's not just the white working class. I think it goes beyond that he is tapping into. So I think that is an area that Democrats have to acknowledge, and then that's going to, with more integrated districts, they're going to have to deal with that. I mean, New York City representatives don't have any sense of, you know, what it's like in West Virginia to have a coal job. And so sort of this, you know, Democrats aren't going to win with those groups if they just have disdain and think they're terrible people. So I think that is part of, you know, what Trump's been able to tap into. So I think we all need to be talking to a much broader universe about our ideas, you know. I'm center right and think free enterprise and, you know, and things Mia Love was talking about, you know, where I'm at, but both parties have to have a message to a far broader audience than they currently have.
And they have to send, you know, what did your quote say about not being a voice for the voiceless? Turn the microphone over, right? And Republican efforts in the West were a great example of that. I mean, the one, you know, they didn't go and try to get Latino people in the West to vote for them. They found Latino Republicans and elevated them through the party. So, you know, what I'm arguing is, you know, that stuff matters a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wendy, in terms of talking to this diverse group of voters, that is, you know, the American voter, do you think Democrats, what do you think they've learned from 2018 going into, or 2016 rather, going into, and 2018 actually, we should say, going into 2020, are they effectively tailoring their message to make it more inclusive across the country and not more of a liberal elite message as it was criticized to be?
I think they're trying. To be honest, I believe that the vote for the Democrats lies through the path of black women. And that's just being honest. Whether South Carolina, we could look at Georgia. We could look at the special election that happened in Alabama and how black women literally were the people who changed that tide. And I think they're trying, but again, I'm not sure if they're doing enough. And I do have friends and colleagues who are working within each campaign. You know, I'm friends with Simone, who is on the Biden campaign. I'm friends with Valencia, who's on the Warren campaign. So they're trying to push them to continue to make those efforts more noticeable to the people who it matters to. But I think as a society, and especially when it comes to politics, we often put too much emphasis on this whole notion of diversity. Diversity is great, But it's not, you don't win with diversity. You win with inclusiveness. And those are two different things. Diversity, oftentimes people have people in these positions as a sense of a token.
Right.
One black, one person from this community.
Yep. One woman.
One woman, check.
And is it really, when we say diversity, I mean, it seems like often that is very much a superficial,
It is.
physical. It's not about the diversity of where you come from or
It
what
is.
your
Or
experience
diversity of
is.
opinions.
It never is.
Diversity of opinion,
It's
and that's
always
back to inclusiveness.
It's always smoke and mirrors. You know, we use that word, and diversity is so great. And first, you have to ask yourself, what does that mean? But second, I always push people when I do my consultancy work, move away from diversity and think of inclusiveness. What does inclusiveness look like to you? Because oftentimes, you may have someone from a certain group or demographic to check off for your personal self, but how does that person feel while they're there? That's what matters.
And what's their role?
Because
Right.
when you include people, then more of those people will come naturally and organically. But let's stop trying to check boxes. So to answer your question on if they're doing a good job, yeah, but is it being done in a way that I think is organic and going to bring more people in? And is it from the heart, or are they just trying to win? Absolutely not.
Is it pandering?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things I've noticed, and I think this is probably the case everywhere, people who are charged with that, like there's a sense like, I'm okay with expanding access as long as there's still a hierarchical structure to it, right? Like that's what my sense is in the election world out there that I'm in. You know, it's because there's a ton of diversity out there in journalism and data analytics or whatever, but it's because I opened the door and I'm inviting you to have this space, right? But when you come in and say, no, that space is mine, I'm sitting down
I
here.
want your space.
Right, I want your space. That's where the problem is, and that's where
Absolutely.
people need to start working.
And they can just make the table bigger. Oftentimes when they have
There's a
meetings,
novel
it's like,
concept.
You're not on the table, you're on the menu.
And that's why a lot of people, like now the new notion when I go into communities of color, there used to be this whole thing where we say, oh, we want to seat at the table, and now we're moving away from that. People are like, no, we're creating our own damn table. Forget your table. We're going to create our own.
Also
And
because you're at a table where you can't speak sometimes.
Exactly.
Just because you have a seat doesn't mean you have a voice.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
It's like power. I've given this to you. Right. Yeah.
and you don't want to be the only person in the room. That's
No.
always the only woman, the only minority. That's never a fun position to
Never.
be in because then you don't want everyone turning to you. So what do women think about this?
Wendy, what do black people think about this? I'm like, I don't know. Not sure.
I want to ask just
Let
one.
me call my secret phone.
Let me call my black people hotline. I don't know.
I want to ask one final question before we open it up to questions from the audience. But Rachel, in 2018, you accurately forecast months before the election that Democrats would pick up 42 House seats in the House. And I was looking at your predictions for 2020, and you have one out there. And I'd love to hear you share your prediction.
Oh, what is it?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
That one.
Yeah, that one. Just that little thing where I predict the presidential election 16 months out, right? That's my forecast. My whole website's getting moved to my new center, which is the Niskanen Center, and that's going to get released sometime in February, right along the time this big voter file analysis is coming out that I was just talking about. So my election research is really concerned with the aggregate environment, and it's arguing that party ID has always been important in American politics, but now it is not just, it's literally the only thing that matters, right? I mean, Doug Jones almost lost the Alabama Senate seat to a child, a guy who's molesting children, right? So, it was close. It was really close. So that's something that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago in American politics, frankly, okay? There's a lot of things happening in American politics right now that just couldn't have been feasible 10 years ago, and we have not updated our understanding of electoral behavior behavior, voting behavior, aggregate election outcomes to catch up to that. So what I am doing, and what I did, was I anticipated a backlash effect to Donald Trump getting elected. I anticipated it would come predominantly out of highly college-educated areas, and unfortunately for Barbara, that was her district was literally like patient zero. I kind of, am applying that same concept to the Electoral College map. And, it builds too on a book that I wrote that looks at what happened in the Midwest. The narrative that Trump won over the Midwest it's a very distorted picture of what happened there. A lot of what the story in the Midwest was about was dissatisfaction in what I call the everybody sucks 2016 election, where nobody liked Clinton or Trump. And actually the data had been sending us a very clear signal all the way through the election. And what the takeaway should have been for analysts, for everybody, and I'm not saying I saw this and no one else did. I was coming out of I just finished my grad degree. But usually about 6% of voters in the national polling will say, I don't know who I'm going to vote for between presidential candidates. And in the case of 2016, that number was doubled on average, okay, all the way through. And what that should have told us is that we have no idea what's going to happen on election day. And it should have suggested we're going to see this historic third-party, protest balloting defection. I mean, 2000 has this reputation of being the election in which the Nader voters tossed the election to Bush because of Florida. In Florida, the defection vote in 2000 was less than 2%, okay? In Florida in 2016, it was like over 5%. Wisconsin, a state that Trump carried by 0.7 of a point between Clinton and Trump, 6.32% of the voters there cast protest ballots. I mean, it really had this dramatic effect on what normally happens in our modern elections. And then, of course, the depressed turnout, the Russian interference, which we come to later find out was geared towards suppressing minority turnout specifically. So, this idea that Trump had this great appeal in the Midwest, that Democrats have to find this new economic message that they've never had before, it's not a good diagnosis, in my opinion, of what happened, what they need to do to win. They have to mitigate that defection, that protest balloting, which I think the environment will do for them, and they need to re-energize that Obama coalition, right? Because that disappeared and it cost them big time. So in terms of my electoral forecast, what I'm looking at in my model is, how much college education population is in the state, how partisan competitive it is. I have the benefit of the 2018 election now to kind of see what each state's surge potential is in turnout. And really, for me, the heart of the election is going to be in Arizona, North Carolina again, like in 2008, Florida, because Florida's got one attribute no other analyst ever mentions that makes it really weird and explains why it always kind of shocks the Democrats: old people. It's the oldest state in the union, right?
Is it Maine?
And no, really? Florida by a long shot. Okay,
pretty old.
But Maine is second, so good for you. And that, if Susan Collins has an ace in her sleeve, that's it, right? And they vote at like 80%, whereas Gen Z and millennials vote at like 40%, right? And underinvestment in Latino voter, just chronic inefficiency in the Democratic campaign operations across the board, but particularly in Florida. So my guess is the Midwest, especially Minnesota, I mean, that's off the table to the Republicans. Michigan looks more and more like it's off the table to Republicans. Same with Pennsylvania. I mean, the things that we saw out of 2018, those were not on the table for Republican Senate pickups in 2018. And they should have been, because midterms are great conditions normally for the Republican Party. But the fact of the matter is the GOP was incapable of competing for those 2 Senate seats. And that tells me, they flipped the Wisconsin gubernatorial race with Scott Walker, who was basically Teflon in Wisconsin. It was close, but they did it, right? They lost the other race. So I think, when we're looking at Virginia and Colorado, by the way, long swing states, completely off the map. They're not even going to be competed.
So your ultimate,
What's your ultimate?
I'm going to wrap you up a little bit just because I want to make sure we have time from that. But your ultimate
so
in 2020.
The ultimate is this.
Ultimate outcome.
Unless Michael Bloomberg, unless some kind of horrible scenario happens for the Democrats where they end up with a third-party candidate like Bloomberg, say in response to someone like Sanders winning the nomination, Democrats have a huge advantage in the Electoral College, and they're going to win because my model starts them over 270. It's at 278, and obviously you only need 270 to win. That is before we get to the 4 swing states of Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona.
There we go. There's
Debs
one
win.
forecast. We'll see where it ends up in November. And I know we have a couple of microphones if there are questions. This gentleman just put his hand up right there.
Thank you all for coming today.
A Yang fan, huh?
A little bit, yeah. I recognize the position. I know he's the Ron Paul this year, but
No. He's, just one of the most really, probably in history, the most remarkable long shot candidate, save for Donald Trump, in the history of presidential nominations. So,
yeah. So
Andrew Yang.
So I know he talks a lot about economic anxiety. I think that probably is a bit of a factor, but I've been thinking more lately, doesn't quite explain why more people that I know who have no economic anxiety are just as fervently pro-Trump now. And what I've been thinking about is that how much of a factor is cultural anxiety, especially between the educated professional class, probably most of the people here, and everybody else. Frankly, I've even seen this today, some instances of what I think is driving this wedge between these groups. The obsessing over concerns of educated professionals and to the detriment of everybody else's concerns, and even shaming other Americans for not keeping up with the latest fads of whatever the cultural understanding is currently among our elites.
That kind of a little bit like political correctness. It's interesting. It's the only thing we didn't talk about here that I thought you said it exactly right. Part of the appeal of the populist movement, right, which is a phenomenon which Barbara talked about, this thing in itself, which Bernie Sanders and Trump are very similar in that sense. It's a pushback against elitist. It's a pushback against systems that people feel have failed them. And I personally believe a lot of it, kind of going back to traditional polling, ever since the economic downturn, 2008, 2009, it was a long recovery. And there were people that were very frustrated and lost faith in public and private institutions. And they never really regained it. And under the Obama administration, there was so much frustration, particularly among the certain groups of working class individuals, many Republicans, some independent conservatives, that felt that they were getting the raw end of the stick. They just were never, they went through their 401ks, they went through their savings, they went through everything, and they just were not getting that leg up. And they wanted what was being predicted. A lot of political scientists were talking about a third way candidate. It was something that was outside the system. Now, traditionally, political scientists, we look at it and say, oh, that's a governor. That's somebody who's outside the system. And what happened is it went so extreme to people that were not part of, in any way, of the system. For one, they wanted somebody who represented more economic diversity, what people were feeling. And two, it's kind of pushing back against a system, which is why you see people, why would you like Trump? That energy and intensity is a leadership style. Trump taps into that extremely well, which is why when you're trying to put a Washington-type candidate, like either a Hillary Clinton or a Joe Biden, you're going to have a really hard time against a movement that is responding to different, kind of outputs. And that's a big part of this debate.
Yeah, I agree. I think I have said, that, in the spectrum of Democratic nominees in that model that I was just talking about, there's easier paths and harder candidates. And, the whole forecasting world, analyst world, is very much in the mind of, Biden's the easy guy, pick because he's going to attract moderates and that's how you win. And almost all of them, I think, are anti the idea that Sanders is electable. And then I am I'm not saying Sanders is the easy path, but I'm certainly less skeptical because of what you just said. I drove through rural Virginia on my way to New York a few weeks ago, and I passed a billboard that said, "Trump, the people's president." Right? You don't answer that in rural America with Joe Biden, okay? Or, even Elizabeth Warren or certainly Amy Klobuchar, right? There's only one candidate on that Democratic spectrum that you could actually battle that with, and that is, Bernie Sanders. And one of the reasons I think that so many of my compatriots in Never Trump and the media elites and, the Morning Joe people and the forecasting world don't get that is because they've never been poor and they don't really know any poor people or hang out with the working class. Whereas I come from the working class and I'm more in tune with that. There is angst out there. People can't go to a dentist. People can't fix their car when it breaks down. And there is massive anxiety out there on the left and the right. That's why that populist fervor is so powerful.
I think we have another question in the front here.
Rachel, thank you for your analysis of what you think is going to happen in 2020. For those of us who are flaming moderates, part of the radical middle and a believer in rapid incrementalism, i.e. a third-way Democrat, that is good news. I was wondering if your analysis had also covered what you project for the Senate.
Yeah, so it's funny that you should give me that shameless plug opportunity because along with the other shameless plugs that I've managed to pull off when I'm not stealing earrings, I also am going to be, when I do that Niskanen Center website launch here in a few weeks, will be releasing my update to the forecast, the presidential forecast, and finally the Senate and House race rankings. Yeah, so very, very soon you will know. I have talked quite a bit about the Senate, though. I've talked about how I think that Gardner in Colorado is basically toast. As I just alluded to, Colorado is not even going to be a swing state at the presidential level. It's the demographics that are going to kill him. Colorado is extremely college educated. It cannot be more hostile territory for a Trump Republican, which is why you see this divergent strategy between him and McSally, where he is trying to walk that line, and he's certainly not calling mainstream CNN reporters liberal hacks and fundraising off of it. And then Collins, of course, is really, she's in a pickle. She's in a real pickle. But beyond that, Tillis in North Carolina and Joni Ernst in Iowa, we'll know more when we see the primary turnout in Iowa, because until 2016, Iowa was good for Democrats. I mean, there's always more Democrats that participate in the Iowa caucus than in the Republican caucus there, okay? The Democratic Party in Iowa is extremely robust. We're gonna have a really good sense of a lot of things when we see the primary turnout. It's a great data point that's gonna be coming very soon. And also McSally in Arizona, which I just said really has a very strong potential to be a state that flips blue in the Electoral College, kind of potential to replace a Wisconsin if it fails, or a future Wisconsin, and then possibly 2 Democratic senators when Mark Kelly, who is if you're going to run somebody with crossover appeal, run a NASA guy, a pretty good bet there. So, the Senate, here's the thing with Democrats is they're going to lose that Alabama Senate seat almost certainly. They're going to go after the elusive prize of Mitch McConnell's Senate seat in Kentucky. That's going to suck up a lot of money, like the Tennessee Senate race in 2018 did, especially now that they flipped that governor's race, and they're going to believe that they can do it. So, but that still puts them one shy, so they need one more seat, and it's got to come from Georgia. And they've got 2 open seats there. One's open, one's an incumbent.
Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you all for being here. We are out of time. Thank you all for your excellent insight.
Yeah. Just like what we got in February, and if you follow these right now, the organization.
Good morning, everyone. Should we go? Yeah, go ahead. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sydney Williams. I am a fourth-year biology major and Ridley Scholar here at the University of Virginia, and I'm also an intern with the Center for Politics, which gave me the opportunity to introduce Miss Kathleen Townsend this morning. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend was the Director of Retirement Security at the Economic Policy Institute from 2018 to 2019, and currently serves as a research professor at Georgetown University, where she founded the Center for Retirement Initiatives. She was the state of Maryland's first woman lieutenant governor from 1995 to 2003. Prior to being elected lieutenant governor, Ms. Townsend served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the United States. Ms. Townsend is a Woodrow Wilson Fellow and has taught foreign policy at the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Maryland. She founded the Maryland Student Service Alliance, making Maryland the first and only state to make community service a requirement for high school graduation. An honors graduate of Harvard University, Ms. Townsend received her law degree from the University of New Mexico, where she was a member of the Law Review. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend.
How are you? Thank you. Can I take this? Hi, how are you doing? Really? I really don't believe it. You've been sitting forever, so you're welcome to stand up and just stretch yourselves a little bit. My gosh. As you know, I'm delighted to be back here at the University of Virginia. I was probably conceived here. I'm born on the 4th of July, and my father and mother lived at Charlottesville because my father went to law school here. Thus. And as you know, my uncle Teddy went here, my brother Max and my brother Bobby went here, my sister-in-law went here. And I think I have one of my nieces or nephews, but I'm embarrassed to know which one. I know, I should know my family better. Some people in this audience probably do. Like Michael McShane. Anyway, it really is great to be here, and it's great to honor the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, that women can vote, and it is great to be in Virginia where you passed the ERA. Whoa! It is really, really terrific. And that you have a woman Speaker of the legislature, and you're doing just a terrific job. And also that you voted Democrat. I don't think you've done that since I lived in McLean a long time ago, so hallelujah. That's just terrific. So I'm going to just tell you my plan for this, my part of today. I plan to speak for 20 minutes, and does anybody have a timer, like a watch? Could you make sure that I keep to that? I sometimes find myself so fascinating that I go overboard. So if you could do that, that would be helpful. I want to speak for 10 minutes about women, and then I want to speak for 10 minutes about retirement, and then I want to take questions, okay? Townsend. Who didn't know that at this point? I'm going to make you guess at the end of my talk. Who's was speaking to you, okay? Great. So first of all, I'm going to talk about women. Okay, first of all, I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. Can you do that? I'm sure that's easy after the last 2.5 hours. Okay, close your eyes. Now think of somebody in power. Okay? All right. How many of you thought of a woman in power? Yeah, half, less than half. 30%. You fail. I mean, we're doing a whole segment about women. I ask you to imagine somebody in power, and 30% think of a woman in power. Do you understand the problem? Did I illustrate that well? Thank you. Now, why is that? why is it so difficult to think of a picture of a woman in power? This is what I think. We live in a democracy, and so we don't have an image of a woman in power. Like in England, they have a queen. And in most of Europe, they have queens. So they are accustomed to having a system in which there are women in power, right? Queens. Somebody once said, well, we have queens in Miami. I said, they don't count. But anyway, so we don't have a queen, so that, when you have, that's one problem. The second problem is we are a Judeo-Christian society, so our God is male. I mean, we're supposed to have female gods, but basically, I tried that out once and that didn't go over. This group is missing a little sense of humor. So our God is male, right? That's who you pray to in a Judeo-Christian tradition. Unless you're Catholic. If you're Catholic and you live in like South America or go to parochial school as I did, you do pray to Our Lady a lot. And so in Latin America, you can have presidents because Our Lady is, I mean, really, the truth is she's a bigger deal in some Catholic churches than Jesus. And so you can have presidents of Chile and Argentina and Brazil. That would not happen in the United States. Jesus is still bigger deal. So, and in India, they have 70 million gods. Did you know that? How many knew that you had 70 million gods? And you're now learning something from this talk. And half of those gods are male, and half are female. So you can have female leaders. Because if you pray to a female god, it's very different. I actually wrote a book on religion and politics, and I went to a retreat because Father Drinan, who's a great priest, head of Boston College Law School, was a congressman, and then he was told he couldn't be in Congress by the Pope, and also a Catholic priest, so he chose to continue to be a Catholic priest. He told me to go on a retreat. I went to a retreat at a Jesuit retreat house, and the title of the retreat was The Female Image of God. So we prayed for 10 days. I learned, I didn't really look it up very well. This is a mistake. So the day before I went, I said, well, what are the readings and what are we going to talk about? And when were the classes? And they said, oh no, this is a silent retreat. I couldn't believe it. So for 10 days, I prayed to the female image of God. Have any of you ever done that? Well, it's a very different feeling to pray to a female God than to pray to a male God. Try it sometime for 10 days in a silent retreat house. Anyway, it's very empowering. It's a very different feeling. But if you don't have that, you don't know what that kind of power is. So we don't have in the United States that kind of archetype. In fact, if you look at our holidays, they're all male, the holidays that we take off, they're all male. We just celebrated Martin Luther King's Day. We have July 4th. The founders were primarily male, all male, actually. We have the military days, Memorial Day, Veterans. Till recently, they were for males. There is one day devoted to women. It's called Mother's Day. So I didn't even have to make the joke that, Freud said, anything you don't like, you blame on your mother. But she's not a figure of power. She's a figure of, whatever you think of your mother. I'm about to celebrate my mother's 92nd birthday. But anyway, the point is, there's not a sense of power for women. And it's a problem because when women run for political office, we don't know what to think about them. For male, there's a uniform. They wear a suit and a tie, and they cut their hair a certain way. Sometimes they have a beard, sometimes not. Recently, they're now allowed to have beards. When I was growing up, no politician would have a beard. But for a woman, it's really a problem. I remember the first time I got elected lieutenant governor, there was an article in the Baltimore Sun, And it was a big article, this big. Well, maybe not that big, but you know what I mean. And the first paragraph of the article was, she didn't wear rouge or lipstick. Now, I did wear rouge. Somebody said to me the other day, what is rouge? And I did wear lipstick. It faded. I have dry skin. What can I do? I know, drink more water, which I should have. Oh, there it is. And the second article about me, I know that, was an article, this is when I was appointed head of the state police, parole and corrections, parole and probation, corrections, Department of Corrections, and Department of Juvenile Justice, and the Department of Grants, which was $100 million we gave away. So that's a pretty good deal, right? What did the first paragraph talk about? That I didn't wear heels. So you can see, you can see why women have trouble, because they don't have a vision of what a woman looked like. So I have on my wall a World War I poster, and they couldn't find an American to use to show women's strength, and they had to go to France, and they used Joan of Arc. I'm just telling you this to explain why I'm sympathetic to the 2/3 of the audience who didn't raise your hand. Okay, that's the end of my story about women facing problems when they're getting power. My good news is the following. One, we do have Nancy Pelosi, and she's done a great job. Two, in 2018, lots of women were elected and did vote. Three, the story of American politics is we swing the pendulum one way and the other. And Trump has swung it one way very hard, and so we should swing the pendulum back very soon, and we should elect a woman president. Okay? That's the end of my women part. Thank you very much. You don't have, okay. Oh, there's Martha Donnelly walking down this. Martha and I went to elementary, middle, and high school together. We had nuns. Nuns were great. They were the only group in the 19th century that had power, and they ran hospitals, and they ran schools. And this is I wrote about how much I liked the nuns, because they did a really great job. And we went to a Catholic school, and we had a curtsy every time we saw a nun. That's apropos of nothing. Okay, now my second topic, how close am I to 20 minutes?
10 minutes out.
That's just what I wanted it to be. Okay, my second topic is retirement, because I know that that's what I'm working at now, and I figured I'd just talk about that too. Okay, so this is the deal. What do you think? Half of all Americans have nothing saved for retirement. Did you know that? You knew that. 80% of all Americans fear retirement more than death. You can understand that, right? So I've got a solution for this, which we're going to get to in a minute, but this is going to be a little quiz, because I think you haven't talked enough. You've been sitting there listening and listening, and I think my view, having come from a family of 11 children, people like to talk. So I'm going to ask you something. Why do you think half of Americans don't have a retirement plan? Don't have retirement? You are like this. Yes, he answered it right away. That's because he's been around my family for like 80 years. Oh, no, I'm not going to repeat the answer, because he got the answer right away. I know. I want you to think a little bit. Okay, he got it the first time I've ever had anybody in the audience get it like that. Okay, so what else? Does anybody else have an idea? Okay, they think the government will take care of them? Okay, what's another answer?
They think they have plans
Okay? They don't have enough money to save. They don't have it. Okay. All right. You stand up with the right answer. That's the answer. That's partially correct. Let me tell you what happens to people who have plans that do offer 401ks. Let me tell you what the median income, if you do offer. He's completely correct. If you offer a 401k, you get to save. But even if you do offer a 401k, what's the median savings rate if you're a white man with a 401k? Does anybody want to know that answer? Do you think I'm going to give you the answer without you guessing? Come on, you've been listening all morning long. No, tell me in dollar terms. Huh? 5,000. No, median. This is if you have a 401k. Huh? No, it's higher. If you have a 401k and you're white, it's $79,000. If you're black, you have $27,000, and if you're Hispanic, it's $17,000. That is, so the point is, if you have a savings, if you work for a company that offers something saved, you save. Now, you don't save as much as you could because you often lose that money when you change jobs. If you didn't change jobs and if it was a seamless system, you would have saved $400,000. That's what you should have saved, okay? So what's going on now is that 10 states, not Virginia, but we're working on that, 10 states, including Maryland, has passed a law that says every company that doesn't offer a retirement plan has to offer a retirement plan in which we'll take 5% out of your salary and put it into a state-run IRA. Okay? Does everybody understand what that means? Everybody's too embarrassed to admit that they don't understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, so 2 states have implemented that. I'm in charge of I ran the program in Maryland. Oregon and California have gone ahead. Guess what, and you can opt out if you don't want to. So pretend you're working for a company that does that, the ABC beauty salon. Everybody goes to a beauty salon. Just pretend you work there. How many people in Oregon put 5% of their salary into the IRA? They had a choice. Guess. 2%? What else? Anybody else? 20%? Anybody else? 70? 75%. So that shows you that he was right. When you are offered a plan, you do it. You put 75% of your salary in the plan. So this is good news because this will mean that everybody will have a plan in which they can put money in. It will be done seamlessly, and when people retire at that rate, they should have about $400,000 when they retire, which is much more than the $79,000. So what I'm trying to do now is get it at the federal level so that it is portable across states. Because right now, you have to be in Oregon or California or Maryland or New Jersey or Illinois, Connecticut or Vermont, all Democratic states. Virginia should pass it as you could become Democratic now. So that's what I'm working on, and I thought you should know about it because young people, half of all jobs in the United States don't offer a retirement plan. So that doesn't affect you guys, but it affects your children because they're younger than you are. And they go from job to job and they can't save. And we did a poll about this plan, and 77% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats and 86% of young people like this. And why did so many young people like it? Because they saw that their parents couldn't retire very well, and they go from job to job, and they don't have a place to save. So that's what I'm working on, and that's what I would like you to know about. And now I would like to see a raise of hands of how many of you think this is a good idea. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I have 2 minutes to go. Okay. Thank you. I just thought it would be interesting to try to talk to. People say that retirement is really boring to talk to, and so I talked to all the presidential candidates, and 3 have a plan, and none of them talk about it. So I'm just practicing if you can pay attention to me. I'm not kidding. And you paid attention to me for 8 minutes on retirement security, right? So thank you. Now you can, I can talk about a lot of other things if you want, but anyway, do you want to ask any questions about either women, nuns, the election, retirement security? Just as far as the election is concerned, I did file yesterday as a Biden delegate. So I'm putting my, okay, well, I'm just, I'm being straightforward. Okay, that's it. I just figured we should have a dialogue. It's more fun. Okay. Thank you. I have to call on my classmate, Martha. Isn't that fun that she lives in Charlottesville? Martha.
Thank you, Kathleen. And this is a shout out to the whole Sacred Heart nuns and their traditions.
Yeah, we are
fabulous. Anyway, my question is, I understand that people had their retirement plans, and then those plans got rated by the companies that offered them. And I am wondering if, by what you're saying, that it would be paid into a state-run IRA, that it would, because of that, it would never, ever get rated.
It wouldn't get rated. Yes, it would not be rated by a company. And it would be, I don't want to get into this in great gory detail, unless anybody wants me to get into great gory detail. It wouldn't be an IRA. It would be managed more like a pension fund, which means an IRA requires daily liquidity, and a pension fund can do long-term investments called patient capital, which usually means you get better return. Is somebody really bored right now when I said that? You can tell me, you are allowed to raise your hand whenever I'm boring. I say this in all seriousness. I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this that doesn't bore the heck out of you. Because, let me explain, why do I say this? Let me tell you why. Because I've talked to people at AARP, and they've told me that there are 3 words that make people go into the fetal position: retirement, planning, and aging. And so it's retirement, as I said, 80% fear retirement more than death. But why isn't there a political movement around it? Because the word scares people so much they don't want to hear it. So it's very hard to talk about it without everybody fleeing the room. So it was really nice of you not to leave. Thank you. Yes. And then you, sir. Thank you.
My question is about the word companies.
Oh, that question about the companies. Yes, a lot of companies went bankrupt. That's what's happening with the mid-state pension fund right now. Yes, you're exactly right. They did go bankrupt. There were 2 problems. They went bankrupt. The money wasn't well managed. There are a lot of problems with the mid-state.
Excuse me, a little more. How do you compare a business?
Yes.
Say they have one beauty salon, which is, you use that example, to a fairly well-established 100-employee business. Now, the government would run the plan, but wouldn't they have to administer it? Would there be
No,
a
what
cost?
you could do is, with the money, basically, that's a good question. So you could do it two ways. The way the states have done it, 10 states have passed laws, and the way the states have passed the laws, the businesses don't contribute any money at all because there's a federal law. Okay, I want you to raise your hands when you're bored. I'm serious. There's a federal law called ERISA, which says the states can't get involved with retirement plans. And so the 10 states that have passed it cannot tell the employers what to do. I'm trying to get a federal law that will get the employers to contribute, but they'll just put their money in the state plan. So they won't have anything to do with it at all. It will be run by the state will then contract out to a private employer, which they do now. A private employer is called something like a census. They'll do an RF, the states will just use the private sector to run this plan.
But it wouldn't be a burden on the small employers.
It is a good question. This is a very good question. What is your name? Hetty has asked a really good question. Will this be a burden on the small employers? Good question. It might be, the way I'm proposing it, and you can tell me whether you think this is a burden, it would be a 1.5% of the employee's paycheck. So if you're an employee that hires 5 people, I don't know, and you're paying them very little, it might be a 1.5% employee tax, might be a burden. But it's probably about $40 a week, because you're not paying people that much anyway, 1.5%. So you might, like in some states, they say, if it's under 5 employees, you don't have to pay, or if it's under 25 employees, you don't have to pay. But the advantage for small businesses is, number one, you don't have any overhead. Right now, if you're a small business and you want to set up a 401k, it's a pain in the neck. You have to hire lawyers, you have to decide where you're going to put the money, you have to decide all these things, you have to decide what's the best investment vehicle. Really a drag. If you want to be a beauty salon, you know about cutting hair or dyeing it, which I think I need to do pretty soon. I know, it's really a drag. But if you have somebody else do it, you don't have any of that, and you don't have any fiduciary liability. So there's this huge burden that is taken off of you, and it's all done for you. And then for your employees, they can go from Texas to California to Virginia, and they don't have to worry about going from place to place. It's all in one, their money is in one place. Yes, you, and then you, and then you, and then you. How's that sound? Thank you.
Okay. I think it's great what you're talking about, but I really feel like either the federal government or all of the states need to start teaching teenagers, 12, 13, 14 years old, what is a 401k? What is an IRA? What's a Roth IRA? Because right now in Virginia, I think they finally passed it a few years back that they have to take 1 credit hour, I think, in personal finance. So I think that's where we really need to start, is getting them thinking about this when they're much younger.
It is important to think about it. They've learned that financial education among teenagers doesn't work very well. I'm sorry. They've learned that financial education among workers don't work very well. And the reason is what I said. People don't want to think about it because it reminds them that they might die. So I'll give you an example. They'll think about a house. You can do financial education about buying a house or buying a car. But retirement scares people. So I'll give you I talked to a guy who did financial education in a large corporation, and they were giving a match. like it was a 401k match. And they would go into the office for an hour, and they were supposed to do financial education. It was personal. Like, it wasn't a class. It was personal. And the guy spent 55 minutes talking about how he would be reimbursed for his parking space on his MTA pass. And at the end, he said, well, I don't really want to talk about retirement. They're so scared of the word retirement. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just explaining it fills people with such fear. So they go like that. I'm sorry. And so do you see how brave I was to say that? Because you all clapped for him and I explained why that's a problem. I just wanted to highlight that. And this is why it's so difficult. I love you as an audience. You're so great. Yes, anybody else? You back there?
Like the state of Oregon, how does Oregon protect itself from its own government raiding in the future those funds, as we've seen sometimes Social Security and the federal? What systems do they have to protect from their own government using those funds?
Oh, that's a good question. They don't protect themselves. So this is like an IRA or a 401k. You are on the line for it. Remember, it's a really good question. You choose to put your money in a fund that is run basically by the state. You have to trust that the state government is going to do a good job or the state group is going to do a good job in managing your money. What the truth is, remember some states have gone belly up with their state, like Illinois, of course. But why states did a bad job is not usually because they managed the money badly. It's because the state governor, remember 2 governors went to prison in Illinois? Yeah. They didn't put the money in. It's not that they managed the money badly, it's they didn't put the money in. And that's true in New Jersey, and that's true of Illinois. In New York, the State Teachers Association, state teachers, very interesting, they have a very different system. Whereas the budget says, the law says you have to give money to the pension fund first and then give it to the schools. So they're fully funded. So this is like, you put your money in, it's your money, and they don't take it out. And so you have to trust that they can manage the money well. And basically, the advantage of all this money pooled together is you can lower the fees. So for instance, am I getting boring? Yes. Who said yes? Good for you. Okay, see, they're walking out. I don't blame you. The fees on the federal government is 0.03%. The fees on a regular IRA are like 100 basis points, which means that over 40 years, you lose a lot of money to Wall Street. Anyway, if they're put together, it's like you put everything together, it's much lower, right? Okay, I think I'm boring you. I'm afraid of that, as you can tell. Okay, go ahead.
So I would just like to challenge the assertion that people are afraid of the word retirement.
Okay.
Thank you. And that is because I don't like the word retirement, and I am presently not working and have a source of income from a firm that I previously worked for that will keep me alive and happy for the rest of my life, but right. I'm doing other things with my life, and other people might say that I'm retired, and I don't like the word retirement because I think it has the connotation in our society that you're old and feeble and about to die. And so I think we perhaps need another word for it. It's not because people are afraid, it's because our culture has imposed these expectations on people who have previously been referred to as retired.
That's a really good point. And just so you know, in Australia, they have something called a superannuation fund. Isn't that a great name? I had a goal that everybody would use that, like a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. But they call their retirement fund their super. Isn't that much better? Yeah, so that's my goal. We're all going to call our retirement fund our super. And that, I agree. I totally agree with you. You're completely correct. We have to change the words. I'm looking for new words. Super is what I've come up with so far. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming. As a fellow Marylander and a son of 2 Baltimore City police officers, I was wondering what you thought the time frame looks like as far as when we might have a female governor in Maryland.
Good question. I don't know if there's any candidate right now who's thinking of running, but we do have a county executive who's in Prince George's County who looks pretty good, and we have Brooke Learman in Baltimore City, who's a friend, who I think is good. So I think it will come in the next 15 years. And on that note, I want to thank you all for listening and being such good sports all around. Thank you very, very much.